Ms. Hattie called me at exactly 10:50 on a Tuesday night. Bring your daughter to my house right now and go straight upstairs. I frowned at my phone screen, rubbing the exhaustion from my eyes. Why, I asked. Trust me, she said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. You will want to see this. I grabbed my 6-year-old daughter Zuri, rushed across the dark lawn to the house next door, and looked out the second-floor guest room window. A sleek black SUV glided into my back alley with its headlights cut. The doors opened. My sister and her white husband stepped out and disabled my security alarm. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever watched the people who share your blood try to destroy your life in the dark. I am 34 years old, and my life has been built on precision. As the founder of a financial forensics firm, I track missing money, uncover corporate fraud, and find the truth buried under mountains of lies. I am used to analyzing betrayals on spreadsheets, but nothing prepares you for watching a betrayal unfold on your own driveway. That Tuesday night had already been exhausting. I had spent the last 14 hours closing out a massive corporate audit, my eyes burning from staring at columns of numbers. My daughter Zuri was asleep in her room, safe and warm. I was just about to close my laptop and finally get some rest when my phone vibrated on the kitchen island. The caller ID showed Ms. Hattie. Ms. Hattie is my 75-year-old neighbor. She is a sharp-eyed, no-nonsense African-American matriarch who has lived in this Atlanta neighborhood since the 70s. She sits on her front porch every evening, sipping sweet tea, missing absolutely nothing that happens on our street. She knows whose kids are skipping school, whose husbands are coming home late, and which delivery drivers are speeding. We look out for each other. When my father passed away recently, she was the one who brought over casseroles, while my own mother was too busy organizing a high society memorial service to check on me. So when Miss Hattie calls me at almost 11 at night, I know it is not for a casual chat. I answered the phone, my voice thick with fatigue. Hello? Bring your daughter to my house right now and go straight upstairs to the guest room facing your backyard, she commanded. Her tone was sharp, stripped of any neighborly warmth. It was an order. I frowned, completely confused. Ms. Hattie, what is going on? I am exhausted and Zuri is fast asleep. Why do I need to come over there? Trust me, she whispered urgently. You will see. Just hurry and stay in the shadows. Do not turn on any lights. The urgency in her voice sent a spike of pure adrenaline straight through my chest. I did not ask any more questions. I dropped my phone into my pocket, ran up the stairs, and quietly entered Zuri's room. I gently lifted my 6-year-old daughter out of her bed, wrapping her thick pink winter coat around her sleeping form. Zuri mumbled softly, resting her head against my shoulder, completely unaware of the tension radiating from my body. I moved quickly and silently through my house. I bypassed the front door, slipping out through the side entrance that was shielded by heavy oak trees. The night air was biting, sending a chill down my spine as I hurried across the damp grass, separating my property from Ms. Hattie's house. Ms. Hattie was already standing at her back door. She had it propped open just a crack. She ushered me inside without a word, placing a finger to her lips. The interior of her house was pitch black. She pointed up the stairs. I carried Zuri up the carpeted steps, my heart hammering against my ribs with every quiet footfall. I laid Zuri down on the plush bed in the guest room, pulling a blanket over her. Then I crept over to the large window that offered a perfect, unobstructed view of my own driveway and the back entrance of my home. Miss Hattie came up behind me, her presence a silent comfort in the dark room. I peered through the sheer curtains. The neighborhood was dead silent, bathed in the pale glow of street lamps. For a moment, I saw nothing unusual. My house stood exactly as I had left it, the security lights casting long shadows across the driveway. Then I saw it. A sleek black SUV turned the corner at the end of the alley. Its headlights were completely cut off. It glided forward like a predator in the dark, the tires barely making a sound on the pavement. The vehicle crept up to the rear of my property and rolled to a stop right in front of my back gate. I held my breath, my hands gripping the windowsill so tightly my knuckles ached. The driver's side door opened and a tall figure stepped out into the night. The moonlight caught the side of the man's face and my stomach plummeted. It was Trent, my sister Jada's husband. He is a junior partner at a prestigious downtown law firm, a man dripping with white privilege and unearned arrogance. He always wears tailored suits, always speaks to me like I am the hired help, and always looks at my family like we should be grateful he decided to marry into it. But he was not wearing a tailored suit tonight. He was wearing dark jeans and a black hoodie, looking around nervously as he approached my back gate. The passenger door opened next. Out stepped my sister Jada. Even in the middle of a covert nighttime operation, Jada managed to look like she was heading to an exclusive brunch. She was wearing a designer trench coat, her hair perfectly pressed, a massive luxury handbag slung over her shoulder. Jada is 2 years younger than me, but she has always occupied the highest pedestal in our family. She is the golden child, the one who could do no wrong in the eyes of our mother Vivian. While I was studying late into the night to earn my accounting degrees, Jada was racking up credit card debt and partying. I watched in absolute disbelief as Trent confidently walked up to my back door. Next to the door is my high-security alarm keypad. It requires a specialized code to disable the perimeter defense. I saw Trent pull out his phone, illuminate the screen, and punch a sequence of numbers directly into the keypad. The small LED light above the door shifted from solid red to a glowing green. The alarm was deactivated. The lock clicked open. A wave of nausea washed over me. I had installed that system myself. There were only two access codes in existence: my master code and the emergency code I had given to my mother, just in case there was ever a crisis involving Zuri while I was at work. My mother, Vivian, the woman who cares more about country club invitations and high society gossip than her own flesh and blood. She had given Trent and Jada my security code. She had handed them the keys to my sanctuary. The realization was a brutal punch to the gut. But this was a pattern. Jada has always taken what is mine, and Vivian has always facilitated the theft. When I was 19, I had saved $5,000 from working 2 jobs to pay for my upcoming college tuition. That money disappeared from my bank account one afternoon. I found out weeks later that Vivian had transferred it to Jada so my sister could pay the exorbitant fees for her luxury sorority rush. When I confronted them, Vivian told me I was being selfish, that Jada needed to network for her future, and that I could simply take out a student loan. I had to defer my enrollment for a semester because of them. Now, years later, they were escalating from stealing tuition money to orchestrating a coordinated home invasion. Trent and Jada slipped inside my house, shutting the door behind them. I stood frozen at Ms. Hattie's window, my mind racing. What were they looking for? Jewelry, electronics. No, Trent and Jada were drowning in debt to maintain their fake affluent lifestyle. They needed something bigger. A few minutes later, the back door opened again. Trent emerged, his face red with exertion, walking backward as he pulled something heavy over the threshold. Jada followed, pushing from the other side. It was my home office safe. The heavy fireproof steel box, where I kept my most vital personal documents. Trent grunted as he wrestled it down the porch steps, the metal scraping harshly against the concrete. Jada rushed back inside and emerged carrying 3 large cardboard banker boxes. I knew exactly what those boxes looked like. They were the physical archives of my financial records, property deeds, and estate planning documents. They were loading my entire life into the trunk of their SUV. Watching your own sister and her husband rob you in the dead of night is a surreal experience. You expect criminals to wear ski masks and carry crowbars. You do not expect them to be the people who sit across from you at Thanksgiving dinner. They shoved the safe into the back of the SUV, the heavy thud echoing in the quiet alley. Jada tossed the document boxes in right next to it, slammed the trunk shut, and dusted off her hands like she had just finished a mild chore. Beside me, I heard the rustle of fabric. Ms. Hattie had pulled her cell phone from her robe pocket. Her thumb hovered over the screen. "I am calling the police right now," she whispered fiercely. "We have them red-handed. They are going to leave here in handcuffs tonight." I reached out and gently placed my hand over hers, pushing the phone down. "No," I said, my voice shockingly calm. "Do not call the police." Ms. Hattie stared at me like I had lost my mind. "Aaliyah, child, your own sister is stealing your safe. They are committing a felony. You cannot let them just drive away. I looked back out the window at Trent and Jada getting into their vehicle. A petty breaking and entering charge is not enough, I explained quietly. If we call the cops now, Trent will use his law firm connections to post bail by morning. He will claim it was a family dispute over shared property. He will twist the narrative. And tomorrow is too important to let them control the story. Tomorrow afternoon is the final settlement meeting for my late father's estate. That is why they are doing this tonight. They want leverage. They want to strip me of my documents so they can control the distribution of the assets. I pulled my own phone from my pocket. What they do not know is that my business requires me to be extremely cautious, I told Ms. Hattie. A few weeks ago, I noticed my mother acting strangely, asking too many specific questions about where I keep my legal paperwork. So I upgraded my security. Not just the perimeter alarm that Trent just bypassed, but the interior. I opened a disguised application on my phone. It required biometric authentication to unlock. Once I scanned my face, the screen populated with 12 different camera feeds. These were not cheap, easily detectable security cameras. They were military-grade, ultra-high-definition 4K hidden lenses embedded in the smoke detectors, the bookshelf, and the wall clocks throughout my home. They captured audio with crystal-clear precision. I tapped on the feed labeled Home Office. The video loaded instantly. Ms. Hattie leaned in, squinting at the screen. The footage was so sharp, we could read the brand logo on Trent's hoodie. I scrubbed the video back 10 minutes. On the screen, Trent and Jada entered my office. The audio picked up their hushed voices perfectly. I cannot believe your mother actually gave us the right code, Trent said on the recording, laughing as he approached my safe. She was terrified Aaliyah would find out. Jada replied, her voice dripping with disdain. But Mom knows we need to secure these estate documents before the meeting tomorrow. If Aaliyah brings these records to the mediator, we are completely screwed. Trent grunted as he gripped the safe. Just grab the boxes with the financial ledgers. We will burn them in the fire pit tonight. She will have no proof of anything. I watched the recording, the cold truth washing over me. They were not just trying to steal from me. They were trying to erase my legal standing. They wanted to destroy the evidence of my rightful inheritance and cover up whatever financial mess they had gotten themselves into. I tapped a button on the app, downloading the entire 10-minute ultra-high-definition video clip directly to an encrypted offshore cloud server. It was locked behind triple authentication protocols. Even if they managed to steal my phone, the evidence was untouchable. Out the window, the black SUV's engine purred to life. Trent threw it into gear and the vehicle rolled quietly down the alley, disappearing into the shadows of the Atlanta suburbs. Ms. Hattie looked at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and profound respect. You just let them walk away with your safe, she whispered. I smiled, turning off my phone screen. Let them have the safe, I said. It only contains copies of old tax returns and expired passports. The real documents are locked in a vault at my office downtown. But they do not know that. They think they just outsmarted the struggling single mother. They think they have won. I turned away from the window and walked over to the bed where my daughter Zuri was sleeping peacefully, completely shielded from the toxicity of the family she was born into. I stroked her hair, feeling a deep, unyielding resolve settle into my bones. My mother and sister have underestimated me for 34 years. They think I am just a quiet bookkeeper who will roll over and accept their abuse to keep the peace. They think their social status and Trent's law degree make them invincible. But tomorrow at Sunday dinner, before the estate meeting even begins, they are going to learn a very painful lesson. If they want a war for the family assets, they picked the wrong night to start it. They brought a knife to a nuclear launch, and I am going to enjoy watching them press the button. The drive to Buckhead took exactly 45 minutes, giving me plenty of time to compartmentalize my rage into cold, calculated precision. The heavy mahogany doors of my mother Vivian's estate swung open at exactly 1 o'clock. I stepped into the grand foyer, holding Zuri firmly by the hand. The air in the house smelled of expensive catered roasted lamb and the subtle metallic tang of pure hypocrisy. Vivian stood by the sweeping curved staircase. She wore a tailored cream pantsuit that screamed old money, her pearls resting perfectly against her collarbone. She did not kneel to greet her 6-year-old granddaughter. She did not offer a hug or even a forced smile. Instead, she snapped her fingers with sharp impatience. A uniformed nanny I had never seen before stepped out from the hallway. "Take the child to the playroom," Vivian ordered, her tone flat and entirely dismissive. "Do not let her interrupt the adults today. We have business to handle." I squeezed Zuri's hand reassuringly. "Go play, sweetie," I told her softly, keeping my voice light. "Mommy will be right here." Zuri trotted off down the hall, completely shielded from the toxic radiation this family constantly emitted. I watched her go, making absolutely sure she was out of earshot, before I turned back to the woman who gave birth to me. I walked past Vivian without a single word and entered the formal dining room. The space was specifically designed to intimidate anyone who walked into it. A massive crystal chandelier hung over a long, polished walnut table set for four. Jada sat on the right side, casually swirling a mimosa in an expensive crystal flute. She wore a silk emerald wrap dress and a smug, untouchable expression that she had been perfecting since childhood. My eyes immediately locked onto her left wrist. The solid gold Cartier watch gleamed under the chandelier light. That watch was purchased using our late father's money, bought during a supposed grief retreat she took to Aspen just weeks after his sudden funeral. She caught me looking and deliberately adjusted the watch face so it would catch the light even more brightly. At the head of the table sat Trent. He had taken my father's chair. Trent adjusted the cuffs of his custom-tailored suit, leaning back with the unearned confidence of a man who believed his white privilege and junior partner status at a downtown law firm made him the smartest person in any room. He looked at me with a mixture of amusement and utter disdain. He honestly thought he had outsmarted me last night. I thought I was standing here completely defenseless, unaware that my heavy home office safe was currently sitting in the trunk of his black SUV. I kept my face entirely blank. In my line of work as a forensic accountant, the very first rule of auditing a fraudster is letting them believe they are getting away with their crime. You let them talk. You let them build their own trap before you spring it. "You look exhausted," Alia Jada purred, taking a slow, deliberate sip of her drink. "Did you not sleep well last night?" The sheer audacity of the question almost made me laugh out loud. She was fishing for information. She wanted to know if I had discovered the missing safe yet, to see if the panic had set in. I pulled out a chair directly opposite her and sat down smoothly. "I slept perfectly fine, Jada," I replied, unfolding my linen napkin and placing it carefully on my lap. "In fact, I slept better than I have in months. I had a very clear vision of how the future is going to unfold." Trent chuckled, a short and deeply condescending sound. "Always the philosopher, Aaliyah." He steepled his fingers together, staring down his nose at me. "We were hoping you would bring a much better attitude today. This is an extremely important afternoon for the family. We need everyone on exactly the same page before the estate settlement." Vivian marched into the dining room, her expensive heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. She bypassed her usual seat and stood directly behind Trent, presenting a unified front. The visual dynamic was not lost on me. The African-American matriarch standing firmly behind her privileged white son-in-law, elevating him above her own flesh and blood. Vivian had always worshipped proximity to power and status. Trent represented the exact kind of elite, untouchable image she craved for her country club reputation. She had always viewed my quiet independence as a threat to her carefully curated social standing. I expected Vivian to signal the catering staff to bring out the first course. Instead, she reached into a sleek leather folio resting on the side buffet table. She pulled out a thick, heavy stack of legal documents bound with a large metal clip. She walked deliberately over to my side of the table and dropped the massive stack directly onto my empty porcelain dinner plate. The heavy thud echoed loudly in the sudden quiet of the dining room. "Sign these, Aaliyah," Vivian demanded, her voice completely devoid of any maternal warmth. "Do it right now before we sit down to eat." I looked down at the documents resting on my plate. The bold black lettering on the top page was impossible to miss. Voluntary relinquishment of parental rights and guardianship transfer. Below that was a second document titled Irrevocable Surrender of Estate Assets. My heart rate stayed perfectly steady, but my mind sharpened into absolute ruthless focus. They were actually going through with it. The sheer scale of their manipulation was unfolding exactly as I had calculated. Jada set her mimosa down on the table, leaning forward like a predator finally smelling blood. I told Mom about your frantic phone call this morning. Alia Jada lied smoothly, not even blinking as she spun her fabricated narrative. I told her how your house in that unsafe neighborhood was robbed in the middle of the night. It is a terrible tragedy, really. But it proves exactly what we have been saying for years about your lifestyle choices. Trent jumped in immediately, smoothly playing the role of the deeply concerned legal authority. Aaliyah, you are living in a highly dangerous environment. Your home was specifically targeted by criminals. Your daughter was put at immense physical risk. You are a struggling bookkeeper drowning in debt and clearly unable to provide the security or financial stability Zuri desperately needs. We are stepping in to handle this situation properly. Vivian pointed a perfectly manicured finger at the legal papers sitting on my plate. You will sign over primary guardianship of Zuri to Jada and Trent immediately. They can provide her with a stable high society upbringing and the proper educational opportunities. In exchange for your cooperation, we will absorb your mounting debts. But to do that, you must also sign the second document. You will surrender your entire portion of your father's estate over to the family trust. I will manage the assets properly alongside Trent to ensure they are not squandered. I looked at the three of them sitting there in their designer clothes. The absolute unhinged arrogance of their plan was staggering. They had orchestrated a felony home invasion, disabled my alarm system, using my mother's emergency access code, stolen my safe in the dead of night, and now they were weaponizing the very crime they committed to steal my child and my rightful inheritance. They had choreographed this entire Sunday dinner as a psychological ambush. They expected tears. They expected me to break down to beg for mercy, to feel the familiar crushing weight of being the family scapegoat. They expected the old Aaliyah, the one who used to shrink under their collective cruelty and gaslighting. I did not cry. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice or show a single ounce of fear. I slowly reached into my designer leather tote bag resting on the floor beside my chair. My hand paused inside the dark interior of my designer leather tote bag. Vivian watched my shoulder dip and immediately assumed I was reaching for a pen. She tapped her pristine French manicured fingernail against the polished mahogany dining table. The sound was sharp and rhythmic, like a metronome counting down the seconds of my supposed obedience. Sign the papers, Alia, Vivian ordered. Her voice was completely stripped of any maternal affection. Do not make this difficult. We have a private caterer bringing out the roasted lamb in 20 minutes, and I refuse to let your usual stubbornness ruin my appetite. You have dragged our family name through the mud for long enough. It is time to clean up your mess. I kept my hand inside my bag, my fingers brushing against the cool metal casing of my tablet. I looked up at the three of them. What exactly am I signing, Mother? I asked, keeping my tone incredibly flat. Jada let out a loud, theatrical sigh. She set her mimosa glass down and leaned forward, placing her hand over her heart. The Cartier watch on her wrist caught the light from the chandelier again. She arranged her features into a mask of deep, exaggerated concern, a performance she had been perfecting since we were teenagers. We are doing this because we love you, Aaliyah, Jada said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. I was absolutely terrified when you called me this morning. You were screaming. You were completely hysterical. I told Trent we had to intervene immediately before something worse happens to you or my niece. I stared at my sister. The sheer audacity of her lie was almost breathtaking. I had not called her this morning. I had not spoken a single word to her since last month. Yet here she was constructing an entire fictional breakdown to justify their ambush. You called me at 6 in the morning crying that your house had been robbed in the middle of the night. Jada continued looking at our mother to validate her story. You told me someone broke into your home office and stole your safe. You were having a complete panic attack. I had to talk you down for an hour. It broke my heart to hear you so unstable. You are clearly suffering from severe paranoid delusions again, just like you did after Zuri was born. They were using the fake robbery they committed to build a narrative of my mental incompetence. It was a masterclass in gaslighting. Jada had always been exceptional at twisting reality to make herself the victim or the savior. When we were in college, she crashed my car while driving under the influence and somehow convinced Vivian that I had forced her to take the keys. I paid the insurance deductible, while Jada received a brand new luxury sedan as a reward for surviving the trauma. Vivian seized the opening Jada provided. Her eyes narrowed into harsh, resentful slits. This is exactly what I warned you about when you refused to let us help you buy a home in a respectable area. Vivian sneered. You insisted on maintaining that ridiculous independent streak. You bought a house in a ghetto. You surrounded yourself with low-class neighbors, and now you are paying the price. You invited criminals right to your back door and put my only granddaughter in mortal danger. My neighborhood was a quiet, affluent historic district. Ms. Hattie was a retired university dean, but to Vivian, anything outside the gated communities of Buckhead was an unacceptable slum. The first document on your plate is a voluntary relinquishment of parental rights, Vivian stated, crossing her arms over her cream pantsuit. You are clearly unfit to provide a secure environment. Your home was targeted. You are having mental breakdowns over the phone. Jada and Trent have graciously agreed to take primary guardianship of Zuri. They have the resources, the stability, and the social standing to raise her correctly. Jada is arranging for Zuri to be inducted into the Jack and Jill Society. Zuri needs to grow up around the right kind of people, not struggling single mothers and neighborhood criminals. The absolute venom in my mother's words washed over me. She was openly telling me that I was unworthy of raising my own child. She wanted to rip Zuri out of a loving home and place her into this den of superficial vipers just to satisfy her obsession with elite status. And the second document, I asked, my voice remaining eerily calm. Trent decided it was his turn to take control of the narrative. He cleared his throat, adopting the patronizing tone he reserved exclusively for people he viewed as beneath his tax bracket. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, and steepled his fingers. Alia, we need to be realistic about your financial situation, Trent said, adopting his best courtroom negotiation voice. You are a bookkeeper. You manage small accounts for local mom and pop shops. We both know you do not make the kind of money required to sustain yourself, let alone pay for the kind of high-end security a single woman needs. The second document is an irrevocable surrender of your portion of your late father's estate. I tilted my head slightly, feigning confusion. You want me to sign over my inheritance? Trent offered a condescending smile, showing perfectly white veneered teeth. It is for your own protection, Aaliyah. You have mounting debts. We ran a preliminary background check and saw the mortgage balance on your home. If you receive a large lump sum from the estate settlement tomorrow, you will likely squander it or lose it to predators. By surrendering your portion to the family trust, you are allowing me to manage the assets. I will personally oversee the liquidation of your debts and ensure the remaining funds are invested properly alongside Jada's inheritance. Just let the adults handle the complicated finances. You can go back to balancing ledgers and taking care of yourself without the stress of managing real wealth. The mechanics of their trap were flawlessly designed. Step 1. Break into my house and steal my financial records and the estate documents, so I have no proof of my legal standing. Step 2. Use the robbery they committed to declare me an unfit mother, living in a dangerous environment. Step 3. Threaten to take my daughter away using Trent's legal connections unless I voluntarily sign over my parental rights. Step 4. Force me to surrender my inheritance under the guise of paying off debts using the threat of losing Zuri as leverage. It was a hostile takeover of my entire existence. They sat there staring at me, waiting for the inevitable collapse. They expected the tears to start flowing. They expected me to beg for a compromise, to plead with my mother, to see reason, to ask Trent if there was any other way. They wanted me to break so they could feel powerful, so they could validate their lifelong belief that I was nothing more than the weak, disposable scapegoat of the family. The silence in the dining room stretched out heavy and suffocating. The crystal chandelier overhead cast a bright, sterile light on the legal papers resting on my plate. The signature line at the bottom of the page seemed to mock me, demanding I erase my own life with a stroke of blue ink. Vivian let out an impatient sigh, adjusting her pearl necklace. Well, Alia, we are waiting, Vivian said, tapping the table again. We do not have all day. I did not reach for a pen. I let the silence hang for exactly 3 more seconds, letting their arrogant anticipation peak. Then my fingers closed firmly around the sleek metal casing of my device hidden inside my bag. I pulled my tablet out in one smooth, fluid motion. I reached into my designer leather tote bag, the smooth glass of my tablet cool against my fingertips. I did not say a single word as I pulled the device out and unlocked the screen. The dining room remained dead quiet, the only sound the faint rhythmic ticking of the antique grandfather clock in the hallway. I loaded the encrypted file, turned the screen to face them, and slid the tablet directly to the center of the heavy mahogany table, right between Vivian's fine china and Trent's polished silver cutlery. I tapped the play icon. The ultra-high-definition video lit up the space. It was not grainy black and white security footage. It was crystal clear 4K resolution. The screen showed the dark alley behind my house. It showed the black SUV pulling up. It showed Trent in his dark hoodie and Jada in her designer trench coat stepping out into the cold night. But the video was not just visual. The audio kicked in loud and pristine, echoing off the high ceilings of the formal dining room. "I cannot believe your mother actually gave us the right code." Trent's recorded voice chuckled, ringing out for everyone to hear. She was terrified Aaliyah would find out. Jada's recorded voice replied, dripping with the exact same disdain she was currently projecting across the dinner table. "But Mom knows we need to secure these estate documents before the meeting tomorrow." I watched the precise moment the blood completely abandoned Jada's face. Her jaw dropped and her eyes widened in pure, unadulterated panic. She reached out instinctively, her hand trembling so badly that her gold Cartier watch clinked sharply against her crystal water glass. She looked at Trent entirely stripped of her untouchable golden child persona. The entire narrative she had spent all morning spinning about my supposed hysterical phone call was utterly obliterated by the undeniable digital proof playing right in front of them. The recording continued unbothered, capturing the heavy thud of my safe being dragged across the concrete porch, capturing every grunt of effort, every careless laugh as they committed a felony burglary. I looked at Vivian, waiting for the inevitable realization to hit her. I expected at least a flicker of shame for handing my home security code to criminals and putting her 6-year-old granddaughter in danger. But Vivian did not apologize. She did not express a single ounce of remorse. Instead, she doubled down with breathtaking speed. Vivian slammed both of her hands flat onto the dining table, rattling the expensive silverware and knocking over a salt shaker. "How dare you?" Vivian shrieked, her voice shrill and completely defensive. "How dare you put hidden cameras in your own home to spy on your family? You are a monster, Aaliyah. You are sick and twisted. Your sister was simply trying to help this family. She was securing vital family documents that you had no right to hoard. We needed those estate records, and you were being entirely unreasonable by keeping them locked away." It was a masterful pivot. Only Vivian could watch a high-definition video of her golden child committing a midnight home invasion and somehow turn me into the villain for recording it. But this was her signature move. She had been doing this my entire life. When I was a teenager and Jada ruined my science fair project the night before the competition because she was jealous of the attention I was receiving, Vivian blamed me for leaving it on the kitchen counter where it could be damaged. Vivian's reality warped automatically to protect Jada at all costs, even if it meant painting her other daughter as a paranoid monster. "You invited them into my home to steal from me," I said quietly, keeping my posture completely relaxed, leaning back in my chair. "You gave them the code to bypass the safety of your own granddaughter just so you could get your hands on Dad's paperwork." Jada seemed to draw strength from our mother's blind defense. The color slowly returned to her cheeks, replacing her panic with venomous anger. She crossed her arms tightly over her emerald silk dress. "Mom is right," Jada sneered, her voice trembling slightly but growing louder. "You always have to make everything a spectacle, Aaliyah. You set us up. You planted that safe there just to try and trap me because you have always been jealous of my marriage and my relationship with Mom. You really need professional psychiatric help." I sat there and absorbed their verbal assault. I watched a mother and a sister construct a completely alternate reality to justify stealing from me. They truly believed they held all the power. They believed that because I was a Black woman raising a child alone, I was inherently vulnerable to their pressure. They thought my silence was submission, a sign that their psychological warfare was working. But Trent did not panic like his wife. He did not yell like his mother-in-law. He simply sneered, reaching across the table to tap the screen of my tablet, pausing the video right on a freeze frame of his own face holding my safe. He leaned back in his chair, exuding the smug, impenetrable confidence of a wealthy white man who genuinely believed the legal system was built specifically to protect him from people like me. He reached into his tailored suit jacket and pulled out his smartphone. "You really think a little home surveillance video means anything?" Trent asked, his voice dripping with absolute condescension. He looked at me as if I were a foolish child playing a game I did not understand. "I am a senior attorney, Aaliyah. I know the law inside and out, and I know exactly how to bury you. You recorded us without our explicit consent. I will have my firm slap you with a massive lawsuit for illegal surveillance and severe invasion of privacy before you even leave this house today. You will be tied up in litigation for the next decade, and I will drain every single penny you have left trying to defend yourself." He unlocked his phone, holding it up like an executioner's gavel, making sure the screen was visible to me. "And since you want to play dirty, let us talk about Child Protective Services." Trent continued, a vicious, triumphant smile playing on his lips. "I have influential judges on speed dial. I have senior partners at my firm who golf with the regional directors of state family agencies. I will make one phone call right now and tell them that a mentally unstable woman is creating a highly dangerous paranoid environment for a minor. I will tell them you are hallucinating break-ins, recording family members to fuel your delusions, and subjecting your child to profound emotional distress." Vivian nodded vigorously in agreement, standing firmly behind Trent's chair, entirely willing to let her own granddaughter be traumatized by state agents just to secure her high society lifestyle and control over the estate. "By tomorrow morning, Zuri will be placed in state custody." Trent promised, his eyes locked onto mine. "And Jada and I will easily secure emergency placement. Sign the relinquishment forms, Aaliyah. Sign the estate surrender right now, and maybe I will not make the call that ruins your life. Let us walk away with the assets quietly, and you can keep your daughter. Otherwise, you lose the estate, you lose your house to legal fees, and you lose Zuri." Trent let his threat hang in the air, allowing the heavy silence of the dining room to amplify his words. He leaned back in his chair, adjusting his silk tie with the casual arrogance of a man who had never been told no in his entire life. "You do not seem to grasp the gravity of your situation. Alia," he said, his voice dropping into a smooth, practiced cadence he reserved for the courtroom. "Georgia is a two-party consent state. What you just showed us is felony eavesdropping. I do not even need to file a civil suit. I can have the police at your door for unauthorized surveillance before the sun sets. And once you are in a holding cell, filing an emergency ex parte custody order for Zuri will be the easiest paperwork I have ever submitted." He picked up his crystal water glass, taking a slow sip. He wanted me to feel small. He wanted me to feel like the uneducated, struggling single mother they had spent years trying to turn me into. "I know judges who will sign that order while playing a round of golf with my senior partners." Trent continued, setting the glass down with a sharp clink. "You do not have the resources to fight a protracted legal battle. You do not have the pedigree. You will drain your pathetic little savings account on a retainer for some strip mall lawyer, and I will bury them in motions until you are entirely bankrupt. By the time I am done, you will have no house, no money, and absolutely zero access to your daughter. So I suggest you pick up that pen and sign the estate over right now." I kept my eyes locked on my face, a mask of absolute calm. My silence seemed to unnerve Jada. She saw that Trent's legal bulldozing was not producing the desired effect. I was not hyperventilating, I was not reaching for the pen. So my sister did what she always did when she felt she was losing control. She reached for the sharpest, most personal weapon she could find. Jada set her mimosa down and leaned across the table. The panic from watching herself commit a felony on my tablet had vanished, replaced by a calculated, venomous sweetness. "Alia, look at me," Jada said, her voice dripping with artificial concern. "You are not thinking clearly. You are having an episode. We have seen this before." She looked at Trent, then at our mother, shaking her head sadly, as if performing for an invisible jury. "You are having a paranoid breakdown." Jada continued, her eyes locking onto mine with a cold, predatory gleam. just like the one you had after Zuri was born. Do you remember those months, Aaliyah? Do you remember when you were crying on the bathroom floor, completely unable to care for your own newborn? You were entirely unhinged then, and you are entirely unhinged now. This video you just played, it is obviously some kind of deepfake. You probably paid someone online to digitally alter the footage because you are obsessed with tearing down my marriage. You are losing your grip on reality. The sheer cruelty of her revisionist history was breathtaking. After Zuri was born, I had suffered from severe postpartum depression. I was a new mother working around the clock to build my career while raising a child alone. I'd asked my family for help, just a few hours of grace to catch my breath. Instead of helping, Jada had used my vulnerability to convince our mother that I was a failure. I fought my way out of that darkness completely on my own. I went to therapy, I rebuilt my mind, and I created a beautiful, secure life for my daughter. And now Jada was twisting my greatest personal victory into a weapon to declare me legally insane. "We are doing this out of love," Jada whispered, leaning closer. "If you do not sign these papers, Trent and I will testify in court that you are a danger to yourself and your child. We will tell the judge about your history of mental instability. I will have you committed for an involuntary psychiatric hold by tonight. You will be locked in a ward, and Zuri will be sleeping in my guest room. Just let it go, Aaliyah. Sign the estate over. It is the only way we can protect you from yourself." Vivian stood up straighter behind Trent, her pearl necklace catching the light from the chandelier. She crossed her arms, presenting a unified front with her golden child and her privileged son-in-law. "Your sister is right," Vivian stated, her voice as hard and unforgiving as marble. "You have been acting erratically for weeks. I have already discussed your concerning behavior with my friends at the country club. The women on my charity boards, the sisters in my sorority, they have all noticed how aggressive and isolated you have become." Vivian stepped forward, placing a manicured hand on Trent's shoulder to signify her complete allegiance to him. "Do you know how many prominent judges and politicians attend my galas, Aaliyah?" She asked, a cruel smirk playing on her lips. "They sit at my dinner tables. They drink my wine. If I stand before a family court judge and swear under oath that my own daughter is mentally unfit to raise a child, who do you think they are going to believe? A respected, wealthy matriarch of Atlanta society, or a bitter single bookkeeper who lives in the slums and fabricates security footage to frame her own sister? They had boxed me in perfectly, or at least they thought they had. In their minds, they had constructed an inescapable labyrinth of gaslighting, legal threats, and social manipulation. They expected the crushing weight of their combined power to break my spirit. They expected me to look around this massive, opulent dining room and realize that I was entirely outmatched. They wanted me to cry. They wanted me to break down and apologize for daring to challenge them. I sat perfectly still for a long moment. I looked at Trent basking in his unearned authority. I looked at Jada wearing the watch bought with my father's money, weaponizing my past trauma to steal my future. I looked at Vivian, a mother willing to destroy her own flesh and blood just to maintain a facade of high society perfection. The tension in the room was so thick it felt like it could snap the crystal glasses resting on the table. And then something bubbled up from deep inside my chest. It started as a low, quiet sound in the back of my throat. Trent frowned, his smug expression faltering slightly. Jada pulled back, her eyes narrowing in confusion. The sound grew louder. A chuckle escaped my lips. Then another. Within seconds, I threw my head back and let out a deep, resonant, full-bodied laugh. It was not a hysterical laugh. It was not a panicked laugh. It was the rich, genuine, unshakable laughter of a woman who was holding 4 aces while her opponents blindly bragged about a pair of 2s. My laughter echoed off the high ceiling, bouncing against the mahogany walls, completely shattering the suffocating, intimidating atmosphere they had spent the entire afternoon trying to build. I laughed until my chest ached, the sheer absurdity of their arrogance washing over me like a wave. Trent dropped his hand from the table, his face flushing a deep, angry red. Jada stared at me, her mouth slightly open, the cruelty draining from her features and morphing into genuine uncertainty. Vivian took a step back, her hand falling away from Trent's shoulder as if she had just touched a hot stove. The power dynamic in the room did not just shift, it shattered into a million irreparable pieces. I slowly wiped a tear of amusement from the corner of my eye, my laughter subsiding into a razor-sharp smile. I picked up my tablet, locked the screen, and placed it back into my designer bag, sliding my gaze deliberately over each of their faces. I stopped laughing. The room was so quiet you could hear the ice melting in Jada's mimosa glass. I rested my forearms on the table, leaning in just enough to invade Trent's space without moving an inch. "Tell me something, Trent," I said, my voice completely stripped of any humor. "Why exactly do you think I am just a struggling bookkeeper?" Trent scoffed, though the sound was noticeably weaker than it had been 2 minutes ago. His grip on his smartphone tightened. "Because we know exactly what you make. Vivian showed us your tax returns from 5 years ago when you begged her for a loan to fix your roof. You run numbers for local bakeries and hair salons. You are a glorified human calculator." I nodded slowly, absorbing his absolute certainty. "5 years is a very long time in the financial sector," I replied. "You are a senior attorney. You should know better than to rely on outdated discovery." I reached back into my designer leather tote bag. My fingers bypassed the tablet and found the sleek, heavy stock card holder tucked into the side pocket. I pulled out a single business card. It was matte black with raised gold foil lettering, thick and unbending. I held it between my index and middle fingers for a brief second before flicking it across the polished mahogany table. It glided effortlessly over the wood, stopping right next to the voluntary relinquishment papers Vivian had tried to force me to sign. Trent glared at the card. He did not want to look at it. He wanted to maintain his position of power, but human curiosity is a fatal flaw. He lowered his gaze. I watched his eyes scan the raised gold letters. I did not wait for him to read it out loud. "I am the founder and chief executive officer of Apex Financial Forensics," I stated, letting the title echo in the massive dining room. "We do not balance checkbooks for mom and pop shops. We track missing millions. We untangle corporate fraud. We trace offshore shell companies. And we provide expert witness testimony for the federal government. My firm is currently valued at 8 figures, and I own it entirely." Vivian let out a sharp, dismissive breath. "You are lying. You would have told me." "I do not tell you anything, Mother, because anything I build you try to hand over to Jada," I shot back, not breaking eye contact with Trent. "But my net worth is not the reason I brought out my card. I brought it out because of my current client roster." Trent's posture shifted. The smug, untouchable armor he wore was beginning to crack. His lawyer instincts were finally kicking in, warning him that he had walked blindly into a deposition where he was the primary suspect. 3 months ago, the state initiated a massive sweep of downtown law firms following a string of real estate market anomalies. I continued, keeping my voice conversational like I was discussing the weather. "Your firm, Trent, was flagged for irregular trust account activities. The state needed an independent, highly specialized forensic accounting firm to quietly audit the escrow accounts without tipping off the managing partners. My firm won the government contract." Trent stopped breathing. I literally watched his chest freeze. The phone in his hand trembled. "You are auditing my firm," he whispered, the condescension entirely gone, replaced by a hollow, breathless dread. "I am auditing your specific division," I corrected him sharply. "And Trent, you are remarkably sloppy for a man who talks down to everyone else. You really thought you could hide digital trails from the state just because you routed the funds through a tertiary vendor in the Cayman Islands." Jada looked at her husband, her brow furrowed in deep confusion. "Trent, what is she talking about? What offshore routing?" I turned my attention to my sister, offering her a smile sharper than broken glass. "He is not going to answer you, Jada. Because to answer you would be to confess to a massive federal crime in front of witnesses. But since I have already filed my preliminary findings with the state investigator, I am more than happy to explain it to you." I leaned forward, tapping a manicured finger against the mahogany table for emphasis. "Your husband has been systematically draining client settlement funds from his firm's escrow accounts for the past 18 months. He created dummy invoices for phantom legal consulting fees, approved them himself, and wired the money out before the quarterly internal reviews. The total amount missing as of my audit yesterday at 5 in the evening is exactly $1.2 million. Vivian gasped a dramatic clutching sound, her hand flying to her pearl necklace. 1.2 million. Trent, tell her she is lying. Trent did not speak. His eyes were wide, fixed on the black and gold business card on the table as if it were a venomous snake preparing to strike. He cannot tell you I am lying, mother, because the paper trail is absolute, I said, enjoying the total destruction of their reality. And Jada, do you want to know the best part? I traced exactly where that stolen money went. It did not go into a retirement fund. It did not go into a safe investment portfolio. It went directly into funding your fake high society lifestyle. Jada shook her head, shrinking back into her chair. No, Trent works hard. He makes a partner's salary. We are wealthy. You are broke, I corrected her mercilessly. Trent's salary barely covers the mortgage on that glass mansion you live in. The $1.2 million of stolen client money paid for your country club memberships. It paid for your grief retreat to Aspen. It paid for the custom green silk dress you are wearing right now, and it paid for the solid gold Cartier watch you have been flashing in my face all afternoon. I watched the realization hit Jada like a physical blow. She looked down at her wrist, staring at the Cartier watch as if it were a pair of handcuffs. She was not just wearing stolen money, she was legally implicated. As his spouse benefiting directly from embezzled funds, she was an accessory to wire fraud, grand larceny, and corporate theft. If Trent went down, the feds would seize every single asset she claimed to own. You thought you could threaten me with Child Protective Services, I said to Trent, my voice dropping to a lethal whisper. You thought you could waltz into my house, steal my safe, and blackmail me into giving up my father's estate to cover up your massive financial crimes. You thought I was weak because of the color of my skin and my status as a single mother. But Trent, I have been building the criminal case against you for 8 weeks. I tracked every single wire transfer. I matched your internet protocol address to the offshore logins. I handed a perfectly wrapped indictment directly to the state prosecutor. The color completely drained from Trent's face, leaving him a sickening ash gray. The arrogant, untouchable white knight of Vivian's dreams was gone. In his place sat a terrified, broken man, staring at the absolute end of his entire existence. All of his privilege, all of his connections, all of his legal threats were entirely useless against the immutable, devastating reality of financial math. His fingers went slack. The expensive smartphone he had just used to threaten me with a lawsuit slipped from his grip. It hit the hardwood floor with a sharp, violent crack, the screen shattering instantly into a spiderweb of broken glass. Jada stared at the broken phone, then slowly turned her head to look at her husband. Her eyes were wide with absolute, unadulterated horror. The flawless golden child illusion had evaporated in an instant. She was not looking at a successful partner at a law firm anymore. She was looking at a man who was about to be disbarred, publicly humiliated, and indicted on federal felony charges. She was looking at a man who was going to drag her right down into a prison cell with him. The shattered glass from Trent's phone scattered across the expensive Persian rug. That tiny, sharp sound was the only thing breaking the suffocating silence in the dining room. Trent stared at the ruined device by his expensive leather shoes, as if his entire life was reflected in the cracked screen. He was completely paralyzed. All that arrogant white privilege he had wielded like a weapon just moments ago had evaporated, leaving behind a hollow, terrified shell of a man who suddenly realized the justice system was no longer his playground. Jada began to hyperventilate. Her manicured hands flew to her face, her chest heaving as the reality of federal wire fraud settled into her meticulously styled brain. She looked at Trent, waiting for him to object, to pull out a legal loophole, to perform some kind of miracle that would save her country club memberships and her luxury vehicles. But Trent could not even meet her eyes. He kept his head bowed, the fight entirely drained out of him. He knew exactly what federal prosecutors did to attorneys who stole from their own escrow accounts. He knew I had him dead to rights. I sat back and watched the absolute destruction of their golden facade. I expected the tears. I expected the panic. What I did not expect was Vivian. My mother did not rush to comfort her golden child. She did not express horror that her son-in-law had stolen over $1 million. She did not look at me with any sudden realization of my worth. Instead, Vivian simply straightened her pearl necklace, took a deep breath, and stepped directly over the shattered glass on the floor. She moved to the head of the table, placing herself physically between me and Trent, instantly shifting into her role as the ultimate crisis manager of Atlanta high society. "You are going to step down from this audit immediately," Vivian commanded, her voice dropping into a harsh, authoritarian whisper. I blinked, genuinely astounded by her pivot. I looked at Jada, who was currently weeping into her hands, and then back at my mother. "You just heard that your son-in-law embezzled over $1 million to fund your favorite daughter's fake lifestyle," I said, keeping my tone perfectly steady. "And your first instinct is to demand that I commit professional suicide to cover it up." Vivian slammed her hand flat against the mahogany table. "Do not speak to me with that disrespectful tone, Aaliyah. You are my daughter, and you will listen to me. What happens in this house stays in this house. You are not going to hand Trent over to the state investigators. You are going to go back to your office tomorrow morning. You are going to cite a conflict of interest. And you are going to recuse your entire firm from this investigation. You will hand the audit over to another agency, and you will bury the preliminary findings you already filed." I could not help the incredulous smile that touched my lips. "You want me to obstruct a federal investigation. You want me to risk my license, my firm, and my own freedom to protect a man who just spent the last hour threatening to have my 6-year-old daughter taken away by Child Protective Services. I was just trying to secure the estate assets," Vivian snapped, waving her hand dismissively, as if Trent threatening to kidnap my child was just a minor negotiation tactic. Trent made a financial mistake. It happens in high-pressure corporate environments. He can pay the money back quietly before the firm notices. But if you let the state indict him, you will ruin this family. Do you have any idea what the women on my charity boards will say? Do you know what this will do to my standing at the country club? The gossip will destroy us. I will not be the mother-in-law of a convicted felon. I will not have my reputation dragged through the mud because you decided to play hero for the state." The sheer toxicity of her priorities was staggering. Even now, facing the total collapse of Jada's life, Vivian only cared about what her wealthy friends would whisper over Sunday brunch. She was willing to let me destroy everything I had built from the ground up just to protect her fragile elite social standing. "I am not covering for a thief, Mother," I said firmly, crossing my arms over my tailored suit. "My firm was hired to do a job, and the job is done. The state already has the routing numbers. They already have the offshore accounts. The indictment is coming whether you like it or not." Jada let out a loud, pathetic sob, burying her face against Trent's shoulder. Trent just sat there like a corpse. Vivian's eyes darkened into a furious, predatory glare. She walked slowly around the table, stopping just inches from my chair. She looked down at me, her face twisting into a mask of pure malice. She was no longer trying to negotiate. She was preparing to drop the nuclear bomb she always kept in her back pocket for moments exactly like this. "You have always been so ungrateful," Vivian hissed, her voice trembling with rage. "I gave you everything. I raised you in luxury. I provided you with opportunities girls like you only dream of, and you have done nothing but spit in my face. You think because you started some little accounting firm you are untouchable. You think you can waltz in here, threaten your sister's husband, and walk away victorious." She leaned closer, pointing a sharp manicured fingernail directly at my face. "You are forgetting who holds the real power in this family, Aaliyah. You are forgetting who controls your father's trust." I did not flinch. I held her gaze, waiting for the ultimatum I knew was coming. "When your father passed away, he left me as the sole executor of the family trust," Vivian stated, her voice dripping with venomous triumph. "It contains millions of dollars in liquid assets, property portfolios, and investment bonds. It was meant to be divided equally between you and Jada when the estate finally settles. But as the executor, I have absolute discretionary power over the disbursement of those funds." She straightened her posture, looking down her nose at me with the ultimate elitist superiority. "If you do not walk out of this house right now, pull your firm off that audit, and sign over your guardianship of Zuri to Jada as leverage to ensure your silence, I will cut you out entirely. I will call the estate lawyers first thing tomorrow morning and legally disinherit you. I will freeze you out of every single dime your father left behind. I will make sure the trust goes exclusively to Jada to help her rebuild after the damage you have caused." Vivian smiled, a cruel, vicious expression that showed exactly who she truly was. You can act as rich and successful as you want, with your little business cards, Aliyah. But we both know the truth. You are a single mother, living paycheck to paycheck. You need that inheritance to survive. You need my money. So you are going to drop this investigation, or I swear to you, I will leave you with absolutely nothing. You will walk out of here with the clothes on your back, and you will never see a single cent of this family's wealth again. She folded her arms, waiting for my submission. She expected the threat of total financial ruin to force me to my knees. In her world, money was the ultimate weapon, and she believed she held the biggest gun. She thought the promise of millions of dollars from a trust fund would make me sacrifice my integrity, my firm, and my own daughter just to stay in her good graces. I sat perfectly still for a long moment. I let the silence stretch out, savoring the absolute absurdity of her threat. I looked at the voluntary relinquishment papers still sitting on my pristine dinner plate. I looked at Jada weeping softly into Trent's ruined suit. I looked at Trent, a broken man who finally understood that his privilege could not save him from a federal prison sentence. And then I looked up at the woman who had spent 34 years treating me like a disposable afterthought. I slowly uncrossed my arms. I reached out and gently pushed the stack of legal documents away from me, moving them closer to Vivian. I did not stand up. I did not raise my voice. I simply leaned back in my chair, relaxing my shoulders, completely and utterly unbothered by the grand ultimatum she had just delivered. I offered my mother a small, razor-sharp smile. "Why do you not check your banking app, Mother?" Vivian stared at me. Her perfectly drawn eyebrows pulled together in a deep frown. She hated being told what to do. She especially hated being directed by the daughter she had spent over 3 decades trying to condition into total submission. But the absolute certainty in my voice chipped away at her arrogant armor. Her eyes darted to her designer handbag resting on the adjacent chair. She snatched her phone from the side pocket. Her manicured thumb hovered over the screen for a fraction of a second before she tapped the icon for her private wealth management application. The dining room fell into a suffocating stillness. I watched her face intently. I watched the exact millisecond the server authenticated her login. I watched the muscles in her jaw completely slacken. A stark red banner spanned across the top of her digital dashboard. It did not show her multi-million-dollar balance. It did not show her stock portfolio yields. It displayed 3 devastating words in bold capital letters: "Account frozen indefinitely." Vivian let out a strangled gasp. The phone slipped from her fingers and clattered onto the mahogany table. She pressed her hand against her chest as if she had just taken a physical bullet. Jada saw our mother collapse backward into her chair and instantly went into a full-blown panic. She ripped open her own emerald green clutch. She pulled out a stack of heavy metal platinum credit cards, scattering them across the table as she frantically pulled up her own banking application. Her hands were shaking so violently she mistyped her password twice. When the screen finally loaded, Jada let out a sound that was half scream and half sob. Frozen. Every single joint account she shared with Trent. Every personal line of credit. The offshore or trust disbursements. All of it was locked behind a federal blockade. Her available balance was hard zero. "What did you do?" Jada shrieked, her voice cracking as she slammed her hands on the table. "My cards are locked. The mortgage autopay hits tomorrow morning. Trent, do something. Call the bank." Trent did not move. He was still staring blankly at the shattered glass of his own phone on the floor. He knew exactly what had happened. He knew that calling a bank customer service representative was entirely useless when the federal government dropped a financial guillotine on your life. I kept my posture perfectly relaxed, folding my hands neatly in my lap. "I will tell you exactly what I did," I said, my voice cutting cleanly through Jada's hysterical sobbing. "I operate a highly classified financial forensics firm. When I uncover concrete evidence of felony embezzlement tied to a state audit, I am legally obligated to report my findings directly to the federal authorities. But I did not just send them a spreadsheet outlining Trent's offshore wire transfers. I sent them the ultra-high-definition video of my sister and my brother-in-law executing a coordinated midnight robbery to steal my financial records." I leaned forward, making sure Vivian heard every single word. "I filed an emergency injunction at 6 o'clock this morning. I outlined a very simple, highly effective legal theory to the federal prosecutor. Trent stole $1.2 million from his law firm. He is legally married to Jada. Jada is a primary beneficiary of the massive estate currently managed by you, mother. Since you handed Trent the security codes to my house to facilitate a felony, it establishes a clear pattern of collusion. Therefore, the entire family trust your offshore accounts and every single asset tied to our late father's estate is now classified as a potential vehicle for laundering stolen money. Vivian shook her head, her perfectly styled hair falling out of place. You cannot do this, she whispered, her voice devoid of its usual booming authority. I am the executor of the trust. I hold the power. You hold absolutely nothing, I corrected her sharply. A federal judge signed the asset freeze at 8 o'clock this morning based on my evidence. The mandate went out to every financial institution associated with your social security numbers. The trust fund you just tried to use as a weapon to force me to surrender my daughter is currently seized pending a full federal investigation into racketeering and wire fraud. I watched Vivian struggle to process her new reality. This was the woman who had kicked me out of her house when I was 18 years old. I had asked her for a tiny loan to help cover my college housing because she had let Jada drain my tuition savings. Vivian had laughed in my face. She told me I would end up destitute on the streets and that she would never give a single dime to a daughter who refused to respect her absolute authority. She used her wealth to control everyone around her. It was the source of her country club supremacy and her vicious maternal leverage, and I had just reached across the table and stripped her of her entire identity in one swift digital strike. Jada was hyperventilating now, clutching her gold Cartier watch, as if the feds were going to march into the dining room and rip it off her wrist. Aaliyah, please. Jada begged, the cruel elitist facade totally stripped away. You have to undo this. We have car leases. We have country club dues. My charity gala is next weekend and my card is on file for the catering. I will be ruined. Everyone in Atlanta will know we are broke. That is the least of your concerns, Jada, I replied, devoid of a single ounce of pity. You should be far more worried about the fact that your husband cannot afford a defense attorney. Trent finally lifted his head. His face was a sickly pale gray. The realization had finally hit him. He was a white-collar criminal who had just been stripped of his white-collar resources. He was looking down the barrel of a federal indictment without the ability to retain high-powered legal counsel. I looked at the three of them sitting among their catered food and their crystal glasses trapped in a multi-million-dollar mansion they could no longer afford to maintain. Not a single cent can be moved, I stated, my voice echoing with finality. You cannot transfer funds. You cannot hide cash in shell companies. You cannot sell your jewelry or leverage the estate. The federal government has locked you out of your own empire. You are completely and utterly cut off. Trent moved first. The absolute finality of my words seemed to snap the invisible tether holding his fragile composure together. He did not look at me. He turned his head slowly, his bloodshot eyes locking onto Jada. The polished, arrogant junior partner vanished entirely. In his place was a cornered, desperate animal realizing he was caught in a trap of his own making. You told me there was cash, Trent hissed, his voice vibrating with a primal, barely contained rage. He stood up so violently that his heavy oak chair crashed backward onto the hardwood floor. You swore to me, Jada. You looked me in the eye and promised me that your sister kept unregistered property deeds and hundreds of thousands of dollars in untraceable cash inside that safe. Jada shrank back into her seat, pulling her designer coat tightly around her shoulders, as if it could protect her from her husband's wrath. Trent, calm down. We can figure this out. Calm down, Trent roared, slamming his fist onto the mahogany dining table. The crystal glasses rattled sharply. I just committed a federal felony. I broke into a house. I transported stolen property across county lines. I did it because you told me we could use the cash to quietly replace the escrow funds before the firm's quarterly audit. You told me it was a victimless crime because Aaliyah would be too scared to report it. You lied to me. I did not lie, Jada shrieked, her voice reaching a pitch that hurt my ears. The golden child illusion was completely gone, replaced by the selfish, erratic manipulator I had known my entire life. Mom said Aaliyah was hoarding the estate assets. Mom is the one who told us the safe was full of money. Vivian gasped, taking a defensive step back. Do not you dare put this on me, Jada. I simply suggested that your sister was hiding resources. I never told you to go to her house in the middle of the night like common street thugs. You gave us the alarm codes, Jada screamed right back, pointing a trembling manicured finger at our mother. You practically handed us the map. You told Trent exactly when Aaliyah's neighborhood patrol changes shifts. You orchestrated this entire thing because you were terrified Aaliyah was going to find out you have been secretly siphoning money from the family trust to pay for your country club renovations. I sat back and watched the destruction. It was a masterpiece of their own design. For 34 years, this family had operated on a foundation of lies, enabling, and mutual exploitation. They had stayed united only as long as they had me to use as their common enemy. The moment I removed myself as their victim and trapped them in a room with their own consequences, the loyalty evaporated. They were feral. They were a pack of starving wolves turning on each other the second the meat ran out. Trent rounded the table, pointing aggressively at Jada. I ruined my career for you. I embezzled that money because you threw a hysterical fit every time I asked you to stick to a budget. You needed the new Mercedes. You needed the Aspen ski trips. You threatened to leave me if I could not provide the lifestyle your mother demanded we maintain. You are a grown man. Jada spat back, standing up to meet his anger. You are a lawyer. You made the decision to steal from your own clients. Do not act like I put a gun to your head. You liked the lifestyle just as much as I did. You loved walking into those charity galas and having everyone treat you like royalty. And now I am going to federal prison, Trent shouted, his face inches from hers. Because my wife is a manipulative, greedy liar who dragged me into a half-baked burglary scheme. Enough, Vivian commanded, trying to summon the booming authoritarian voice that usually brought everyone to heel. Stop this foolishness right now. We are a prominent family. We do not behave like this. But her voice cracked. The authority was gone. Without the threat of her wealth, without the power of the family trust to enforce compliance. Vivian was just an aging woman shouting in a dining room. Trent ignored her completely. Jada glared at her with open contempt. You did this, Jada yelled at Vivian, her face streaked with ruined makeup. You promised me I would never have to worry. You promised me the estate was mine. You set me up to take the fall for your own financial mismanagement. I picked up my glass of water, took a slow, refreshing sip, and finally decided to intervene. The show was entertaining, but I had a schedule to keep. I stood up. The movement was slow, deliberate, and entirely unbothered. The sheer calm radiating from my body forced the three of them to stop screaming and look at me. I walked around the edge of the large mahogany table, my heels clicking softly against the floor, until I stood directly in front of Vivian. She tried to lift her chin, tried to look down at me through her designer glasses, but her eyes were wide with a fear she could no longer hide. You have a lot of nerve talking about who is setting who up, Mother, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. The silence in the room amplified every syllable. Do you remember the night of my 18th birthday? Do you remember what happened right here in this exact house? Vivian swallowed hard, refusing to answer. I do, I continued, stepping just a fraction closer, invading her space and forcing her to confront her own history. I had just gotten my acceptance letter for my accounting program. I had a clean record, a perfect credit score, and a plan for my future. And you called me into your study. Jada had maxed out 4 different credit cards under a fake business name and defaulted on a luxury car lease. She was facing grand larceny charges at 20 years old. Jada looked away, her face flushing with renewed shame. You demanded that I co-sign a massive fraudulent consolidation loan to cover her debts, I said, locking my gaze onto Vivian. You told me it was my duty as the lesser daughter to sacrifice my financial future, so Jada's record would remain spotless. And when I looked you in the eye and refused, you did not hesitate. I let the memory hang in the air, heavy and suffocating. You packed my belongings in black plastic trash bags. You dragged them out to the front lawn in the pouring rain. You locked the doors and called the neighborhood security to have me escorted off the premises. I begged you for a few days to find a dorm room and you laughed at me. Vivian's lip trembled, but she still could not muster the courage to speak. You stood on your grand front porch, I said, my voice hardening into steel. And you told me I was a worthless, ungrateful child who would end up with absolutely nothing. You told me I would spend my life scrubbing floors while Jada ruled Atlanta society. I spread my arms, gesturing to the opulent, over-decorated dining room around us. The crystal chandelier, the imported rugs, the expensive art on the walls. You told me I would end up with nothing. I repeated, delivering the words with surgical precision. Look at you now, standing in a multi-million-dollar house that does not even belong to you. The words landed exactly as intended. They struck the very core of Vivian's identity, shattering the last remaining illusion of her power. She stumbled backward, her shoulders slumping as if all the air had been violently pulled from her lungs. She had no retort. She had no threats left to hurl. She was entirely defeated by the daughter she had thrown away. I turned to look at Jada, expecting my sister to be curled in on herself, completely broken by the reality of her impending federal indictment and her ruined marriage. But Jada was not crying anymore. The frantic, hyperventilating panic that had consumed her for the last 20 minutes had completely vanished. The tears on her cheeks were already drying. I watched a terrifying, almost mechanical shift take place in her eyes. The cornered, desperate animal disappeared, instantly replaced by something far more dangerous. It was the look of a predator who had just remembered she had a concealed weapon. A vicious, triumphant smile slowly crossed Jada's face. It was a cold, calculating grin that sent a sudden, unexpected chill down my spine. She straightened her posture, ignoring Trent completely, and smoothed down the front of her emerald green dress. She reached one hand into her designer bag. Jada pulled her hand out of the emerald green designer bag. She was not holding a tissue to dry her tears. She was holding a thick, folded stack of heavy parchment paper. The top page was heavily embossed, covered in bright red notary stamps and official state seals. She did not slide it across the table. She slammed it down directly on top of the voluntary relinquishment forms Vivian had tried to force on me earlier. The sharp smack of the paper against the wood sounded like a gunshot in the quiet dining room. "You really think you are the only one who plans ahead?" Aliyah Jada asked. Her voice was no longer shaking. It was dripping with a toxic, triumphant venom. "You think because you run some calculator firm downtown that you hold all the cards. You are so busy looking at bank routing numbers that you completely miss the big picture." I glanced down at the document. The bold, formal font at the top read, "Last Will and Testament Amendment." "Go ahead and read it," Jada commanded, crossing her arms over her chest. Her solid gold Cartier watch gleamed under the chandelier, but she was no longer looking at it like a pair of handcuffs. She wore it like a crown. "I will save you the legal jargon, since you are just a glorified bookkeeper. That is a fully notarized, legally binding amendment to Dad's estate. He signed it exactly 2 days before he had his sudden heart attack." Vivian stepped forward, her eyes darting from Jada to the paperwork on the table. "Jada, what is this? What are you talking about? Your father left me as the executor. He left the estate to be divided equally between you two." "Not anymore," Mother Jada snapped, turning on Vivian with a ruthlessness that genuinely surprised me. Jada looked her own mother up and down with pure, unadulterated disgust. "You thought you were so powerful holding that trust fund over our heads. You thought you could control my marriage and my lifestyle just because your name was on the executor line. But Dad knew the truth. He knew you were mismanaging the properties to pay for your country club renovations. I knew Alia was a mentally unstable disappointment who would just squander her half of the money on therapy and her ghetto house." Jada tapped her manicured fingernail against the heavy red notary stamp on the bottom of the page. "Dad knew I was the only one in this family who actually understood how to maintain our high society legacy, so he fixed it. 2 days before he died, he sat down with a private notary and he signed everything over to me." Vivian let out a strangled, breathless sound. She reached out with trembling hands to pick up the document, but Jada snatched it away before our mother could even touch it. "Do not touch my property," Jada hissed. "Read my lips, Mother. I own it all. This amendment strips you of your executor status entirely. It bypasses the probate waiting period. 100% of the liquid assets, the offshore trusts, the investment portfolios, and this very multi-million-dollar mansion you are standing in belong exclusively to me. Aaliyah gets absolutely zero. You get absolutely zero. I am the sole uncontested beneficiary of the entire empire." Vivian stumbled backward, her hand flying to her mouth. The woman who had spent 34 years pitting her daughters against each other had just been utterly destroyed by her own creation. Vivian had raised a golden child who felt so entitled to the world that she did not hesitate to step on her mother's neck the second it benefited her. Vivian looked at Jada with sheer terror, finally realizing that the loyalty she had bought with my father's money was completely worthless. But Trent was not looking at Vivian. Trent was staring at the heavily stamped document in Jada's hands. I watched the physical transformation of my brother-in-law. The sickening ash-gray color of sheer panic slowly faded from his cheeks. His posture straightened. The defeated, broken white-collar criminal, who had been staring at a federal prison sentence just moments ago, took a deep breath. His legal brain, which had been short-circuited by my audit reveal, suddenly rebooted. He saw a loophole. He saw an escape hatch. Trent reached out and gently took the document from his wife's hands. Jada allowed it, offering him a wicked, conspiratorial smile. Trent scanned the legal text. His eyes darted back and forth across the paragraphs, checking the dates, checking the stipulations, checking the bold red notary stamp at the bottom of the page. A slow, ugly, arrogant smirk spread across Trent's face. He smoothed his silk tie, rolled his shoulders back, and looked at me with the exact same unearned confidence he had displayed when I first walked into the dining room. "Well now, Alia," Trent said, his voice smooth and dripping with patronizing authority. "This changes the landscape entirely." I kept my face perfectly still. I let him talk. I needed him to fully commit to the forgery before I buried him with it. "You see, Alia, the federal injunction you filed this morning was based on a very specific legal theory," Trent explained, pacing slowly around the edge of the mahogany table. "You convinced a federal judge to freeze the estate assets because you claimed you were a defrauded beneficiary and that Vivian was a colluding executor. You built your entire federal freeze on the premise that the money I took belonged partially to you." He stopped pacing and leaned over the table, resting his hands flat on the wood, getting right in my face. "But if this amendment was signed 2 days before your father's death..." Trent continued, his smirk widening into a full, confident grin. "Then the assets never entered probate under Vivian's control. They bypassed the original will entirely. They transferred directly into a private trust solely owned by Jada. Which means the $1.2 million I transferred offshore did not come from an estate you have any claim to. It came from an estate owned exclusively by my wife." Jada clapped her hands together, letting out a sharp, joyful laugh. "Exactly. And as the sole owner of those assets, I retroactively authorize every single wire transfer my husband made. He did not embezzle anything. He was simply moving my money at my explicit request." Trent nodded, holding the forged amendment up like an impenetrable shield. "Your entire federal investigation just collapsed, Aaliyah. You cannot claim wire fraud if the owner of the account authorized the transfer. You cannot freeze an estate to protect your inheritance when you are not legally entitled to a single penny of it. The injunction you filed this morning was filed under false pretenses." He tossed the document back onto the table, crossing his arms over his chest. He felt untouchable again. He genuinely believed that a piece of paper Jada had clearly fabricated in a panic was going to save him from the Department of Justice. "Your asset freeze means absolutely nothing," Trent stated, his voice ringing with absolute smug certainty. "I will have this amendment filed with the probate court first thing tomorrow morning. The judge will immediately lift the freeze on Jada's accounts. My firm will cover up the missing escrow funds before the afternoon, and your little forensic accounting stunt will be completely erased." I looked at the document resting on the table. It was a remarkably bold play. They were trying to outmaneuver a federal fraud charge by introducing a forged will. They were stacking felonies on top of felonies, completely blinded by their own desperation and arrogance. They had built their entire counterattack on a piece of paper that was fundamentally flawed. "You have no legal standing to freeze an estate. You aren't a beneficiary of Aaliyah," Trent sneered, looking down at me with pure contempt. "I will have you in cuffs for financial interference by morning. 3 days is exactly 72 hours. I used every single one of those hours to methodically tighten the noose around my family's neck." The boardroom inside the downtown Atlanta probate court is a masterclass in psychological intimidation. The room is a massive freezing chamber composed entirely of floor-to-ceiling frosted glass walls and dark mahogany paneling. It is designed to make you feel exposed to the world while simultaneously trapping you in a sterile, suffocating box. The air conditioning is cranked so high it feels like a meat locker. I am sitting entirely alone on one side of a massive rectangular conference table. I do not have a legal team flanking me. I do not have an assistant passing me notes. I have a single leather briefcase, a cup of black coffee, and a custom-tailored crimson suit that projects absolute unbothered authority. I do not need a team of lawyers to translate the truth. The contrast across the table is nothing short of poetic. Vivian, Jada, and Trent are sitting shoulder to shoulder, and their elite high society facade is thoroughly, completely wrecked. The federal asset freeze I initiated has done its job beautifully. When you cut off a parasite's food supply, it takes less than 3 days for the decay to show. Vivian is wearing a St. John knit suit that is visibly wrinkled. Her signature pearl necklace lacks its usual luster, and the flawless blowout she usually sports looks flat and unmaintained. Her offshore accounts are locked, meaning she could not even pay her private glam squad to come to the house this morning. She keeps adjusting her collar, her eyes darting nervously around the glass room. She is no longer the untouchable matriarch of Buckhead. She is a woman who realizes her country club friends are already reading about her frozen assets in the local business journals. Jada looks completely hollowed out. The vibrant, arrogant golden child who tried to gaslight me at Sunday dinner is gone. Her hair is pulled back into a severe tight bun. She is clutching her designer handbag to her chest like a flotation device, her knuckles stark white against the leather. She has spent the last 72 hours watching every single one of her platinum credit cards decline. She knows she is sitting on a powder keg of federal charges, and the stress is eating her alive from the inside out. But Trent looks the worst of them all. His prestigious downtown law firm clearly suspended him the very minute my forensic audit triggered the federal subpoenas. He is wearing a dark, expensive suit, but he is sweating straight through his collar. He is not sitting at the head of the table today. He is flanked by two very expensive, very panicked defense attorneys he must have scrambled to retain on contingency because his personal accounts are completely frozen. I look at the two men sitting beside him. I know their hourly rates. I also know Trent has absolutely zero liquidity to pay them. The irony makes me take a slow, satisfied sip of my black coffee. The heavy mahogany door opens and the court-appointed mediator steps into the room. Judge Sterling is a stern, older African-American woman with zero tolerance for high society drama. She carries a massive stack of manila folders and drops them onto the head of the table with a loud, resounding thwack. She adjusts her reading glasses and glares at all of us taking her seat. We are here for an emergency probate mediation regarding the estate settlement and the subsequent federal injunctions placed upon the assets. Judge Sterling begins, her voice echoing sharply in the glass room. I have read the preliminary filings from both parties. I will state right now that the level of hostility in these documents is highly unusual even for this court. We are going to proceed with facts and only facts. Trent's lead defense attorney, a bulldog of a man named Harrison, immediately stands up. He buttons his suit jacket, attempting to dominate the room with his physical presence. He looks at me with the distinct condescension of a man who assumes a black woman sitting alone is an easy target to bully. Your Honor. Harrison starts projecting his voice as if he is arguing in front of a full jury rather than a single mediator. We are here today because the individual sitting across the table has executed a malicious, baseless, and highly retaliatory federal injunction against my clients. Aaliyah has weaponized her accounting license to freeze an estate she is fundamentally estranged from. She is a disgruntled daughter, attempting to stall the rightful legal distribution of family assets through fabricated claims of wire fraud and corporate embezzlement against my client Trent. I do not flinch. I keep my hands folded neatly on the table, letting Harrison exhaust his expensive vocabulary. My clients have endured profound emotional distress and severe financial hardship over the past 72 hours. Harrison continues gesturing dramatically toward Vivian and Jada. They have been locked out of their own lives due to an unverified audit that Aaliyah initiated purely out of spite. We are formally requesting that this court dissolve the injunction, immediately release the frozen trust funds, and sanction Aaliyah for gross professional misconduct. Judge Sterling does not look impressed. She flips open a file folder. The federal freeze was granted by a district judge based on high-definition video evidence of a midnight burglary orchestrated by your clients, Mr. Harrison. Do you have a factual defense against the breaking and entering, or are you just here to deliver a monologue? Harrison stiffens his face, flushing red. The events at Aaliyah's residence were a simple misunderstanding, Your Honor. My clients were attempting to retrieve vital family documents that Aaliyah was holding hostage. They had explicit permission from the estate executor to enter the premises. I decide it is time to intercept. I lean forward slightly, keeping my voice entirely devoid of emotion. They did not have permission to enter my home, Judge Sterling, I state clearly. Vivian does not own my property, and she has no legal authority to distribute my security codes to individuals actively under federal investigation for stealing over $1 million in client funds. But this is not the first time my mother and sister have attempted to bypass the law to steal my assets. Vivian gasps, placing a hand to her chest in mock horror. 2 years ago, when I was hospitalized for a severe allergic reaction, Vivian and Jada attempted to file an emergency medical proxy to declare me temporarily incompetent. I continue holding Judge Sterling's gaze. They tried to use my hospitalization to gain signatory access to my business accounts. I had to have hospital security physically remove them from my room. They have a highly documented history of utilizing fraudulent legal loopholes to siphon money they did not earn. Last night's robbery was simply an escalation of their standard operating procedure. Jada suddenly bursts into tears. It is a flawless, calculated performance. She covers her face with her hands, letting her shoulders shake violently. She waits exactly 5 seconds before looking up at the mediator, her eyes swimming with fake distress. That is a lie. Jada weeps, her voice trembling. Aaliyah has always been paranoid. She has always hated me because our father trusted me with the family legacy. He knew Aaliyah was ruthless. He knew she would try to destroy my marriage out of sheer jealousy. That is why he did what he did to protect us from her. Jada reaches into her designer bag and pulls out the heavy parchment document, the forged amendment to the will. She slides it across the table toward her attorney, who then presents it directly to Judge Sterling. Vivian immediately backs up her golden child, dabbing her own dry eyes with a tissue. It breaks a mother's heart to sit in a courtroom and watch her eldest daughter attack her own flesh and blood, Vivian says, her voice dripping with artificial sorrow. Aaliyah has always been a bitter, vindictive woman. She resents the fact that Jada married well and moved in the right social circles. When my husband realized how toxic Aaliyah had become, he made the difficult decision to secure the family's future. He bypassed the original will specifically to keep the assets out of her vindictive hands. Trent smirks, regaining a tiny fraction of his old arrogance. He leans forward, resting his elbows on the table. He actually believes they are winning. The federal freeze is completely invalid, Your Honor. Trent states, his voice dripping with smug authority. Aaliyah filed that injunction claiming I transferred funds from an estate she was entitled to. But as that document proves, the assets technically and legally belonged exclusively to Jada before her father even passed away. My wife retroactively authorized every single wire transfer I made. You cannot claim wire fraud when the sole owner of the estate gives her husband permission to move her own money. Aaliyah has absolutely no claim to the estate, which makes her entire federal audit a completely baseless, illegal overreach. I remain perfectly still. I let them spin their desperate web of lies. I let the defense attorneys look smug. I watch Judge Sterling pick up the heavily notarized amendment. She adjusts her glasses, examining the bold red notary stamps, the dates, and the signatures. On paper, the document looks highly official. It looks exactly like the kind of ironclad legal instrument that would completely obliterate my case. The tension in the glass boardroom peaks. The air feels so brittle it could shatter. Jada is holding her breath. Trent is practically vibrating with anticipated victory. Vivian sits up straighter, ready to reclaim her stolen crown. Judge Sterling lowers the document and looks over her reading glasses directly at me. Her expression is unreadable. The weight of the court rests entirely on her next words. She taps the heavy parchment paper with her pen. I have reviewed this document, Judge Sterling says, her voice echoing sharply against the glass walls. It appears to be a fully notarized, legally binding amendment executed 48 hours prior to the decedent's death. It transfers sole ownership of the entire estate, the properties and the trust directly to your sister, bypassing probate entirely. Judge Sterling folds her hands together, staring me dead in the eye. So I have to ask you, Aaliyah, why exactly are you wasting this court's valuable time if your sister holds a notarized amendment to the will? Trent did not even give me a fraction of a second to answer the judge. He practically leaped out of his mahogany chair, smoothing his expensive silk tie, desperate to seize control of the narrative before I could utter a single syllable. Your Honor, if I may. Trent began, his voice dripping with the kind of practiced condescension that only comes from a lifetime of unearned privilege. My sister-in-law is wasting the court's time because she simply cannot accept the reality of her position within this family. Aaliyah has spent years completely estranged from her mother and her sister. She intentionally isolated herself. She chose to build a life in a low-income neighborhood, rejecting every opportunity her parents provided her. When her father realized that Aaliyah harbored deep-seated resentment and exhibited severe signs of mental instability, he made the incredibly difficult but legally sound decision to protect his legacy. He knew Aaliyah would attempt to dismantle everything this prominent family has built out of sheer, unadulterated bitterness. That is why he executed this amendment. He entrusted his entire estate to Jada, the daughter who actually respected him, the daughter who maintained the family honor. Aaliyah is not sitting here today seeking justice. She is sitting here attempting to steal an inheritance she did not earn, using a fabricated federal audit to extort my wife. We ask that you validate this amendment immediately and dismiss her fraudulent injunction so my family can finally grieve in peace. Trent offered Judge Sterling a solemn, perfectly rehearsed nod and slowly sat back down. Jada wiped a fake tear from her cheek. Vivian placed a comforting hand over Jada's wrist, presenting the ultimate picture of a besieged, loving family, standing strong against a malicious attacker. They had polished this victim routine to an absolute science. They genuinely believed that if they said the words with enough authority, the universe would simply bend to their will. I sat perfectly still, letting the echo of Trent's ridiculous monologue fade into the freezing air of the glass boardroom. I looked at Harrison, Trent's lead defense attorney, who was already packing his legal pads into his briefcase, assuming the hearing was effectively over. I looked at Jada, whose smug, triumphant smirk was slowly creeping back onto her face. I looked at Vivian, who was glaring at me with a look of pure, triumphant disdain. Then I looked directly at Judge Sterling. I did not raise my voice. I did not defend my character. I did not address a single one of Trent's pathetic insults. I simply reached forward and placed my hands on the brass clasps of my leather briefcase. The sharp metallic clicks echoed loudly across the long mahogany table. I opened the lid and calmly extracted a single crisp manila folder. I did not slide it across the table yet. I held it in my hands, resting my forearms on the wood. I am wasting the court's time, Your Honor, because the document sitting in front of you is a verifiable amateurish forgery, I stated, my voice ringing with absolute ice-cold certainty. And the man sitting across the table, an active member of the state bar, just submitted a fabricated legal instrument into evidence during a federal asset hearing. Trent's smirk vanished instantly. He shot up in his chair. I object. Your Honor, this is blatant defamation. She has absolutely no proof. Sit down, Mr. Trent, Judge. Sterling snapped, her voice cracking like a whip. She did not take her eyes off me. Continue, Aaliyah. You are making an exceptionally serious accusation. Do you have forensic proof to back up this claim? I do, Your Honor, I replied smoothly. I am a forensic accountant. I do not deal in assumptions. I deal in paper trails, metadata, and absolute authentication. When my mother and sister orchestrated the midnight robbery of my home, they stole my physical safe. They believed they were stealing my original estate documents. But as I informed them at dinner 3 days ago, they only stole decoy files. The true documents have always been secured in a biometric vault at my downtown office. I knew they would attempt to produce a counter-narrative when they realized the actual documents were missing. I just did not expect a senior attorney to be sloppy enough to forge a state notary stamp. I stood up slowly, picking up my manila folder. I walked over to the mediator and placed 3 separate pieces of heavy stock paper directly next to Jada's forged amendment. I would like to direct the court's attention to the bright red notary stamp at the bottom of my sister's document, I instructed, pointing a manicured finger at the seal. You will see that it bears the name of one Marcus Vance, a registered notary public in Fulton County. You will also see that the date of execution on that amendment is listed as October 12th, exactly 2 days prior to my father's sudden passing. Judge Sterling adjusted her reading glasses, examining the red ink closely. That is correct, she confirmed. The stamp appears standard. It appears standard until you run the registration number through the state database, I countered, pulling the first document from my folder and sliding it precisely into the judge's line of sight. This is a certified time-stamped printout from the Georgia Secretary of State's official Notary Commission registry. I pulled this record at 7 o'clock this morning. Marcus Vance was indeed a registered notary. However, his state commission officially expired on August 1st of the previous year. That is a full 14 months before my father allegedly sat down to sign this amendment. The silence that fell over the boardroom was deafening. It was the kind of absolute suffocating quiet that precedes a catastrophic explosion. I did not stop. I did not give them a single second to breathe. I pulled the second document from my folder. Furthermore, Your Honor, I have provided the sworn notarized affidavit of Marcus Vance himself, executed yesterday afternoon after my investigative team contacted him. Mr. Vance confirms that he surrendered his notary supplies for destruction upon his retirement to Florida 2 years ago. He explicitly states he has never met my father, he has never met my sister, and he certainly did not stamp this amendment. I turned my head very slowly, locking my gaze onto Trent. His face had gone completely devoid of blood. His jaw hung slightly open. The two expensive defense attorneys sitting beside him physically shifted their chairs away from him, the realization hitting them that their client had just implicated them in submitting forged evidence to a judge. Harrison's face was a mask of sheer, unadulterated horror. He was looking at Trent like the man was a walking biohazard. Trent bought a replica stamp online or sourced an expired seal from a shady vendor, I stated, letting my words slice through the freezing air. He drafted a fake amendment, printed it on heavy stock paper, and had Jada forge my father's signature. He thought a bright red stamp would be enough to intimidate me into backing down. He forgot that he was trying to run a paper con on the CEO of an 8-figure forensic accounting firm. Jada let out a strangled, high-pitched gasp. She dropped her designer handbag on the floor, her hands flying to her face. She looked at Trent, her eyes wide with total panic. Trent, tell them, she shrieked, her voice cracking into a hysterical pitch. Tell them you did not forge it. Tell them Dad signed it. Trent could not speak. His vocal cords seemed completely paralyzed. He stared at the printout from the Secretary of State as if it were his own death warrant. He knew his career was over. He knew his freedom was gone. He had just committed perjury, forgery, and felony fraud right in front of a court-appointed mediator. Vivian clutched the edge of the mahogany table, her knuckles stark white. She was hyperventilating, her chest heaving, as the illusion of her high society supremacy crumbled into a pile of criminal indictments. This cannot be happening, Vivian muttered, shaking her head frantically. This is a mistake. My husband wanted Jada to have the estate. I know he did. He would never leave everything to a vindictive child like you. I turned my attention entirely to my mother. The sheer pathetic desperation in her voice fueled the final devastating blow I had prepared for her. I walked back to my seat, reached into my briefcase one last time, and pulled out a massive 2-inch thick stack of corporate ownership documents bound by a heavy black clip. You are right about one thing, Mother, I said, my voice dropping into a cold, lethal register. He did not leave the estate to me. I slammed the massive stack of documents onto the center of the table. The heavy thud made Jada jump out of her seat. I present the original, unedited deed to the family estate, along with the corporate ledger of the Apex Holdings Group, I announced, looking directly at Judge Sterling. I ask the court to review the transfer of ownership dates. Judge Sterling pulled the heavy stack toward her, flipping open the first page. Her eyes widened slightly as she scanned the legal text. She looked up at Vivian, then back down at the ledger. My father did not leave the estate to Jada, I stated, my voice echoing with absolute crushing finality. He could not. He did not own it. Vivian stood up, her chair screeching violently against the floor. What are you talking about? My husband built that house. My name is on the original mortgage. Your name was on the mortgage until 3 years ago. I corrected her, savoring the absolute destruction of her reality. 3 years ago, Jada and Trent secretly accrued over $2 million in shadow debts from failed startup investments and illegal gambling markers. They went to Dad begging for a bailout so you would not find out and ruin their golden child image. Dad was cash poor. The only asset he had left was the equity in the family estate. He quietly put the house up for private commercial sale to cover their debts and keep Trent's kneecaps intact. Jada let out a loud, pathetic wail, burying her face in her hands. She knew exactly what I was talking about. She knew she had drained her father dry while pretending to be the perfect, successful daughter. But Dad could not find a buyer willing to pay above market value in a private, unlisted sale. I continued stepping forward and sliding the corporate ownership documents directly across the table until they rested right in front of Trent's paralyzed hands. So I bought it. I used the capital from my forensic firm to establish a blind holding company. I purchased the estate at a premium, paid off Jada's massive debts, and allowed Dad to retain a life estate so you would never know you were living in a house you no longer owned. I leaned over the mahogany table looking down at the three people who had spent my entire life trying to make me feel small, worthless, and inadequate. I am the sole owner of that holding company, I declared, ensuring every single syllable landed with maximum devastation. I own the multi-million-dollar house you live in, Mother. I own the luxury cars you drive, Jada. And as of this morning, Trent, I sent my finalized audit to your managing partners. Your law firm fired you at exactly 9 o'clock to save themselves from the federal indictment I just handed them. I stood up straight, smoothing the front of my crimson suit. I looked at the broken, shivering remnants of my toxic family. Dad did not leave the estate to Jada, I repeated softly, delivering the final fatal strike. He sold it to me, and you are all currently trespassing on my property. The silence in the glass boardroom was absolute. You could have heard a single pin drop onto the mahogany table. Vivian stared at the stack of corporate documents resting in front of Trent. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The pristine image of the Buckhead matriarch was fracturing right before my eyes. Jada shook her head violently. She pushed her chair back, the legs scraping loudly against the floor. No, no, that is impossible. Dad would have told us. He would have told Mom. I was too ashamed of you to tell her, I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. 3 years ago, you and Trent managed to rack up over $2 million in shadow debts. You were funding failed tech startups, throwing lavish parties at the country club to impress people who do not even like you. And Trent was covering his illegal gambling markers. You were drowning. You knew the lifestyle you projected to the Atlanta elite was a complete fabrication financed by predatory loans. So you went to Dad behind Mom's back. You begged him for a bailout because you knew if Mom found out her golden child was a financial disaster, she would cut you off to protect her own reputation. Vivian turned her head slowly, looking at Jada. The betrayal in her eyes was palpable. You went to him behind my back. You put this family in debt. I did not stop. I did not give them a moment to regroup. Dad was completely cash poor. I continued tapping the corporate ledger on the table. All his wealth was tied up in the equity of the family estate. He was desperate to save his favorite daughter from total ruin. So he quietly put the house up for private commercial sale. He wanted to sell it to an investor, pay off your massive debts, and lease it back so he could maintain the illusion of wealth. But no private buyer wanted to pay above market value for a vanity project in Atlanta without publicly listing the property and exposing his financial distress to the entire city. Trent stared at the table, his hands trembling. He remembered the debts. He remembered the panic of almost losing his junior partnership back then. I had just secured my first major federal contract for my forensic firm, I stated, ensuring every word landed like a hammer blow. I had the capital. So I established a blind holding company named Apex Holdings Group. I purchased the estate at a 20% premium. I paid off your ridiculous debts, Jada. I kept Trent from getting his legs broken by his bookies. And I granted Dad a life estate agreement. That meant he could live in the house rent-free until the day he died. He got to keep his dignity, and Mom got to keep hosting her society galas without ever knowing she was living under my roof. Vivian gripped the edge of the table. Her knuckles were stark white. You own my home. You own the house I have lived in for 30 years. I own the holding company, I corrected her sharply. And the holding company owns the property, which means I own the roof over your head. I own the luxury SUVs Jada and Trent drive, because Dad leased those vehicles through the estate to keep your monthly expenses hidden. Every single symbol of wealth you have flaunted in my face for the past 3 years belongs entirely to me. You have been living on my charity while actively trying to destroy my life. Jada let out a loud, pathetic wail. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking violently. The realization was absolute. She was not a wealthy heiress. She was a glorified tenant who had just attempted to forge a will to steal property that was already legally sold. Trent tried to salvage some fraction of his dignity. He stood up, smoothing his expensive suit jacket, though his hands were shaking so badly he missed the button. This is irrelevant to my current standing. Trent stammered, his voice cracking under the pressure. I am still a senior partner. I still have the resources of a major downtown law firm to fight this federal injunction. You cannot touch my career, Aaliyah. I reached into my leather briefcase one final time. I pulled out a single crisp piece of heavy bond paper. It bore the embossed logo of his prestigious law firm. I did not toss it. I slid it deliberately across the long mahogany table until it bumped right against his trembling fingers. You might want to read that before you make any more threats, I suggested calmly. Trent looked down at the paper. His eyes scanned the first few lines. The remaining color drained completely from his face, leaving him a sickening shade of gray. His knees buckled slightly, and he collapsed back into his chair as if the bones in his legs had suddenly dissolved. For the benefit of the court, I will summarize it, I announced, looking directly at Judge Sterling, who was watching the scene with rapt attention. As of 9 o'clock this morning, Trent is no longer a senior partner. In fact, he is no longer employed in any capacity. When I finalized my forensic audit last night, I sent a courtesy copy directly to the managing partners of his firm. I showed them exactly how Trent embezzled their client escrow funds. Law firms care about one thing above all else, and that is liability. To save themselves from being implicated in my federal investigation, they terminated him immediately. They stripped him of his equity, seized his corporate accounts, and locked him out of his office. He has no salary. He has no legal backing. He is completely exposed. Harrison, the expensive defense attorney, sitting next to Trent, immediately stood up and began violently shoving his legal pads into his briefcase. I am officially withdrawing as counsel for this client, Harrison declared, his voice echoing loudly in the glass room. I was retained under false pretenses. My client provided fabricated documents to this court and withheld vital information regarding a federal investigation. I will not be a party to felony fraud. The second defense attorney did not even speak. He just grabbed his bag and practically sprinted for the boardroom door, leaving Trent sitting entirely alone on his side of the table, flanked only by empty chairs. The image of the arrogant, privileged man, suddenly stripped of all his systemic armor, was profoundly satisfying to witness. Judge Sterling picked up the stack of corporate ownership documents I had provided. She adjusted her glasses, reviewing the state seals, the transfer dates, and the holding company registration details. The room remained suffocatingly silent as she cross-referenced my legitimate deeds against the forged amendment Jada had submitted. After several agonizing minutes, Judge Sterling lowered her glasses. She looked at Trent and Jada with a gaze so severe it could cut glass. She was an experienced judge who had clearly seen her fair share of entitled criminals, but the sheer audacity of their scheme was stunning even to her. These corporate documents are authenticated and validated, Judge Sterling stated, her voice ringing with absolute judicial authority. The estate was legally transferred to Apex Holdings Group 3 years ago. The deceased had no legal right to bequeath this property, nor could he amend a will regarding assets he did not possess. The amendment submitted by the defense today is a blatant, undeniable forgery. Jada let out another loud sob, hiding her face against Trent's shoulder. But Trent did not comfort her. He just stared blankly at his termination letter, his entire universe reduced to a single sheet of paper. I am lifting the temporary hold on these proceedings. Judge Sterling continued, striking her pen against her notepad. Aaliyah, your federal injunction against the family trust remains firmly in place. Furthermore, I am immediately referring this case to the district attorney. I am ordering a full criminal investigation into Trent and Jada for felony forgery, perjury, and attempted fraud upon this court. You will not be allowed to leave this jurisdiction. The gavel had fallen, the annihilation was complete. Vivian let out a strangled, breathless gasp. She looked around the freezing glass boardroom, finally understanding the sheer magnitude of the destruction. Her golden child was facing federal prison. Her elite son-in-law was a disgraced, disbarred criminal. The massive estate she used to host her society galas belonged to the daughter she had treated like garbage for 34 years. The offshore accounts she relied on to maintain her flawless image were frozen indefinitely by the federal government. Every single piece of her identity had been systematically dismantled and destroyed in less than an hour. Vivian tried to stand up. She placed her hands on the mahogany table, attempting to summon the matriarchal dominance she had wielded her entire life. But her legs gave out. She collapsed heavily back into her leather chair, her pristine posture completely shattering. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with dry, hollow sobs. The reality of her total, inescapable ruin had finally set in. I sat across from them, perfectly composed. I took one last sip of my black coffee. It was still warm. Judge Sterling struck her wooden gavel against the sound block. The sharp crack echoed through the freezing glass boardroom, signaling the absolute end of my family's reign of terror. Court is adjourned, she announced, her voice leaving no room for further debate. She gathered her thick manila folders and exited through the private rear door without giving my mother or my sister a single backward glance. The silence she left behind was suffocating. I did not rush. I calmly picked up my empty coffee cup, tossed it into the wastebasket, and snapped my leather briefcase shut. The sharp metallic click made Trent flinch as if I had just chambered a round in a shotgun. I walked out of the glass boardroom and stepped into the sprawling marble hallway of the courthouse. The polished floors reflected the harsh fluorescent lights above, casting cold shadows across the stone. I expected them to sit in that room and silently process their ruin. But I did not expect the sheer velocity of the explosion that erupted behind my back. The heavy mahogany doors burst open. Trent stormed out, his face contorted in a mask of pure, unadulterated panic and violent rage. How was moving so fast, he nearly collided with a passing bailiff. Jada stumbled out right behind him, clutching her emerald green designer bag like it was a life preserver in a Category 5 hurricane. "Trent, wait!" she pleaded, her voice echoing shrilly down the long, sterile corridor. Her expensive high heels scraped awkwardly against the marble as she scrambled to keep up with his frantic pace. "Trent, please, we need to stop and call another lawyer. We need to fix this right now." Trent stopped dead in his tracks. He spun around so violently that Jada physically recoiled, bracing herself against the stone wall. "Fix this!" he roared, the sound tearing through the quiet courthouse hallway, causing several passing clerks to stop and stare. "You want to fix a federal fraud indictment, Jada? You want to fix the fact that I just submitted a forged legal document to a court-appointed mediator? My career is completely dead. My firm fired me. The district attorney is probably drafting warrants for our arrest right this second, and you want to fix it." Jada reached out, trying to grab his arm, her face a portrait of absolute terror. "I did not know she was going to audit you. I did not know she bought the house. We can just tell the judge Mom made us do it. We can say Vivian manipulated us into faking the amendment." Trent let out a harsh, manic laugh that sounded completely unhinged. "You think the federal government cares about your petty, pathetic family drama? You told me stealing that safe would solve our problems. You looked me in the eye and swore we were grabbing untraceable cash and property deeds. You dragged me into a midnight burglary that triggered a multi-million-dollar racketeering investigation. You lied to me about the house. You lied to me about the estate. You are nothing but a broke, manipulative fraud living on your sister's charity." Jada gasped, stepping back as if he had physically struck her across the face. "Trent, I am your wife. We are in this together." "Not anymore, we are not." Trent spat, his voice dripping with absolute venom. "I am not going to federal prison because of your ridiculous obsession with country club memberships and luxury cars you cannot afford. I am calling a divorce attorney the second I step out of this building. I am filing for immediate separation. I will tell the federal prosecutors exactly how you forged your father's signature on that amendment. I will testify against you to cut a plea deal to save my own skin. We are completely done, Jada. Trent no Jada screamed, lunging forward to grab the lapels of his ruined, expensive suit. You cannot leave me. I have no money. The accounts are frozen. You cannot do this to me. Trent did not hesitate. He shoved her away. It was a hard, violent push born of pure self-preservation and utter disgust. Jada lost her balance on her expensive high heels. She stumbled backward, her arms flailing before she collapsed heavily onto the hard marble floor of the courthouse. Her designer bag spilled open, scattering her useless platinum credit cards, her high-end cosmetics, and her luxury car keys across the polished stone. Trent did not even look down at her. He turned his back on his weeping wife and sprinted down the hallway, pushing past a group of paralegals desperate to escape the building before the federal marshals arrived to collect him. I stood 10 feet away, watching the entire scene unfold. Jada sat on the cold floor, her perfectly styled hair falling in messy strands across her tear-stained face. The golden child of Atlanta society was currently weeping in a public hallway, her marriage completely destroyed, her fake wealth entirely evaporated, and her freedom hanging by a fragile thread. She looked up at me, her chest heaving with violent, racking sobs. She expected me to feel pity. She expected the older sister instinct to kick in. She thought I would walk over, kneel beside her, and help her gather her scattered belongings. She thought decades of blood loyalty would somehow override the fact that she had just tried to steal my daughter and destroy my life. I looked down at her. I saw the girl who had stolen my tuition money to buy friends at a sorority. I saw the woman who had mocked my postpartum depression, calling me an unfit mother. I saw the thief who had broken into my home in the dead of night to steal my security. I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, no triumph, just total absolute apathy. I adjusted my grip on my briefcase and walked forward. My heels clicked rhythmically against the marble floor. I did not slow my pace. I did not alter my path. I walked right past my weeping sister, stepping carefully over a stray tube of her expensive lipstick that had rolled into my way. I did not give her a second glance. She was no longer my problem. She was just a stranger sitting on the floor facing the catastrophic consequences of her own horrific choices. I pushed open the heavy brass doors leading out of the courthouse corridor, navigating toward the grand front exit. The morning sun was shining brightly through the massive glass atrium, warming the chill that had settled in my bones from the freezing boardroom. I could see the busy Atlanta streets ahead, the bustling traffic, the normal people living normal lives, completely untouched by the elite toxicity I had just dismantled. I took a deep breath, ready to step out into the fresh air and finally return to my daughter. Alia, wait. The desperate, frantic voice echoed behind me, bouncing off the high vaulted ceilings of the courthouse lobby. I heard the frantic clicking of heels running across the marble floor, moving much faster than a woman of her age normally should. I stopped just short of the revolving glass doors and slowly turned around. Vivian was sprinting toward me. The immaculate, untouchable matriarch of the family had completely abandoned her dignified high society posture. She was practically tripping over her own feet, her face flushed, her breathing ragged and desperate. She was no longer chasing her disobedient scapegoat of a daughter. She was chasing her landlord. She was chasing the sole owner of her entire fraudulent reality, desperately trying to salvage her own survival before the eviction notice hit her front door. I pushed the heavy brass and glass doors open, stepping out of the courthouse and into the blinding Atlanta sunlight. The thick, humid Georgia air hits my face instantly, thawing the artificial freezing temperature of the probate boardroom that had seeped into my bones over the last hour. I take a deep, grounding breath, letting the ambient noise of the bustling downtown district wash over me. The blaring taxi horns, the distant wail of a police siren, the low, steady hum of midday traffic flowing through the city streets. To my ears, it sounds exactly like absolute unfiltered freedom. I adjust the thick leather strap of my briefcase on my shoulder and begin descending the wide, sweeping white marble steps of the courthouse plaza. My sleek black town car is already idling smoothly at the curb, the driver standing attentively by the open rear door waiting for my arrival. Before my heel can strike the third stone step, the heavy glass doors behind me bang open with frantic, violent force. Alia, wait. The voice is shrill, breathless, and completely stripped of its usual aristocratic polish. I do not stop walking. I keep my eyes focused straight ahead on my waiting vehicle, my posture perfectly rigid. I hear the frantic, uncoordinated clicking of expensive high heels, slapping against the marble steps, moving with a desperate, clumsy speed I have never seen my mother exhibit in my entire 34 years of existence. Alia, stop right now. A hand violently seizes my left bicep, digging sharp manicured nails directly into the expensive fabric of my tailored crimson suit. The physical contact is so jarring, so completely invasive and desperate, that I immediately halt and pivot on my heel to face her. Vivian stands before me on the courthouse steps, her chest heaving as she gasps for air in the oppressive heat. The immaculate, untouchable matriarch of Buckhead society has completely vanished, leaving behind a terrified, disheveled shell of a woman. Her flawless silk cream blouse is twisted at the collar. Her posture, usually rigid with manufactured superiority, is hunched and utterly defeated. The carefully applied designer makeup around her eyes is smudged and running, betraying the sheer, unadulterated panic radiating from her core. She looks older, fragile, and completely devoid of the power she wielded like a weapon just an hour ago. Alia, please, Vivian begs, her voice cracking into a pathetic, wet whimper. You cannot do this. You cannot just walk out of that room and leave me like this. I am your mother. You have to stop the asset freeze. You have to call the judge and tell them it was a misunderstanding. I look down at the hand clutching my arm. I do not yank myself away. I do not raise my voice. I simply stare at her trembling fingers with absolute chilling detachment until she slowly, reluctantly releases her grip, letting her hand fall uselessly to her side. You are my mother, I repeat, my tone flat, reflecting zero empathy or warmth. That is a biological fact, but it is not a magical shield you get to hide behind when your own malicious, calculating schemes finally blow up in your face. You do not get to invoke motherhood only when you are facing federal consequences. Vivian shakes her head frantically, heavy tears spilling over her lashes and cutting deep tracks through her foundation. You do not understand what you are doing to me, she sobs, gesturing wildly back toward the looming courthouse building. You froze my offshore accounts. You took my home. You took everything I have spent my entire life building. Where will I go? Where will I live? What on earth am I supposed to tell my friends at the country club? How am I supposed to show my face at the charity galas when the entire city finds out my house belongs to you and my son-in-law is a federal criminal? Even now, standing on the absolute precipice of total financial ruin and public disgrace, her primary concern is her social calendar. The sheer toxicity of her priorities is staggering yet completely aligned with everything she has ever been. You can tell your country club friends whatever narrative helps you sleep at night, I reply, my voice dropping into a lethal quiet register that forces her to listen to every single syllable. Tell them you decided to downsize. Tell them you wanted to embrace minimalism and give up the mansion. Or if you are feeling particularly adventurous, you could try telling them the truth for once in your life. Tell them you handed the security codes of your 6-year-old granddaughter's home to a desperate white-collar criminal so he could steal my financial records in the dead of night. Tell them you tried to weaponize my past trauma to extort me into signing away my legal rights. Tell them you lost your entire empire because you bet your survival on a forged piece of paper. Alia, please, Vivian cries out, stepping closer, bringing her shaking hands up in a desperate, pleading gesture. I was only trying to protect the family legacy. I was trying to keep us together. You have millions of dollars. You own a massive forensic company. You do not need that house. You do not need to humiliate me like this in public. You cannot just leave me with absolutely nothing. I hold her gaze, refusing to let her look away from the monster she created. I remember being a terrified 18-year-old girl, standing on her pristine front lawn in the pouring rain, watching her throw black plastic trash bags filled with my clothes into the mud because I refused to sign a fraudulent loan for Jada. I remember begging her for just a few $100s to secure a safe dorm room, and I remember the cold, triumphant look on her face when she told me I was a failure who would never amount to anything. You did not leave me with nothing, Mother. I state every word, striking her like a physical blow to the chest. You gave me the profound, undeniable realization that the only person I could ever rely on was myself. You gave me the drive to become completely, fiercely untouchable. You handed me the exact tools I needed to build a financial fortress so strong that people like you could never break into it again. You taught me how to survive in the dark. Vivian opens her mouth to speak, but a dry, ragged sob catches in her throat. She realizes finally that there is no manipulation left to deploy. There is no guilt trip that will work. The emotional leverage she held over me for 3 decades has been entirely incinerated on these marble steps. Consider the 30-day eviction notice you will receive by certified mail tomorrow morning, your final lesson in tough love. I say, delivering the concluding strike with absolute surgical precision. You always told me that success requires hard work and sacrifice. It is time for you to pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. You have exactly 1 month to pack your designer bags and vacate my property. I do not wait for a response. I do not offer a comforting hug or a sympathetic parting glance. I turn my back on the woman who gave birth to me, erasing her from my reality with one decisive, unbothered motion. I walk down the remaining marble steps, the click of my heels sharp and rhythmic against the stone. My driver opens the heavy rear door of the black town car. I slide into the plush leather interior, placing my briefcase on the seat beside me. The driver shuts the door with a solid, satisfying thud, instantly cutting off the sounds of Vivian's loud, desperate sobbing, echoing across the courthouse plaza. The car pulls seamlessly away from the curb, merging into the vibrant afternoon traffic, leaving the wreckage of my former family entirely in the rearview mirror. The heavily tinted windows of the town car shield me from the glaring Atlanta sun as we navigate away from the suffocating concrete of the downtown judicial district. I lean back against the cool premium leather upholstery, closing my eyes for a brief, incredibly necessary moment of decompression. The pure adrenaline that has been keeping my blood pumping at maximum velocity for the past 72 hours slowly begins to recede. My heart rate stabilizes, shifting from a frantic, defensive rhythm into a steady, powerful beat. The deep tension uncoils from my neck and shoulders, melting away as we leave the skyline behind. I did it. I actually did it. I systematically dismantled a generational cycle of emotional abuse and financial exploitation in a single morning, and I walked away without a single scratch on my armor. I look at my phone, checking the encrypted servers for my firm. The business is thriving. The state audit is securely filed, and my company's reputation has just been cemented as the premier forensic accounting agency in the state. The dense urban landscape gradually gives way to the lush, sprawling oak trees and quiet, manicured streets of my historic, peaceful neighborhood. We pull up to my property, the tires crunching softly against the pristine gravel driveway. I step out of the car, breathing in the rich scent of blooming magnolia and fresh-cut grass. My home stands before me, a beautiful, secure 2-story brick sanctuary, equipped with the highest-grade security systems money can buy. But before I walk through my own front door to decompress, I have a very important, highly personal delivery to make. I retrieve a large, elegant bakery box from the trunk of the car, along with a massive, vibrant bouquet of fresh sunflowers and bright yellow lilies. I walk across the manicured lawn, bypassing my own stone walkway, and head straight for the wide wraparound porch of the house next door. Emma's Hattie is already sitting in her favorite wicker rocking chair, wearing a floral duster and a wide-brimmed sun hat, reading a paperback thriller novel. She looks up as my heels tap against her wooden porch stairs. Her sharp, observant eyes take in the massive bouquet and the elegant white bakery box, and a slow, deeply knowing smile spreads across her lined face. She sets her book down on the small wicker table beside her, folding her hands in her lap. "Well now, Miss Hattie," says, her voice rich with amusement and pride. "You look exactly like a woman who just finished taking out the absolute trash." I laugh, a genuine, joyful sound that bubbles up straight from my chest. It is the lightest, most liberated I have felt in 34 years. "I absolutely did, Miss Hattie," I reply, walking over and placing the bright flowers gently into her waiting arms. "And I could not have done it without you looking out for me." I open the white bakery box and present her with a massive double-layer slice of rich red velvet cake complete with the thick cream cheese frosting. I know she loves from the boutique bakery downtown. I wanted to thank you properly. I say, my voice softening with genuine profound gratitude. Thank you for making that phone call at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night. Thank you for paying attention when my own family tried to destroy me in the dark. You protected my daughter and my home when the people who share my blood tried to tear it apart. You are more family to me than they have ever been, and I will never forget that. Emma's Hattie accepts the cake with a delighted hum, her eyes shining with fierce protective warmth. Family is not about blood. Aaliyah, she says, her voice carrying the deep, resonant wisdom of an African-American woman who has seen lifetimes of truth and hardship. Blood just means you are related by biology. Family is about who stands on the porch with you when the wolves come prowling around the back gate. You built a beautiful, strong life for yourself and that sweet little girl of yours. You worked too hard to let anyone steal your peace. Do not ever let anyone make you feel bad for protecting what is yours. I lean down and wrap my arms around her shoulders, giving her a tight, lingering hug. She pats my back firmly, anchoring me to the reality of the community I have chosen to build around myself. I leave Miss Hattie enjoying her red velvet cake in the afternoon sun and walk the short distance back to my own front porch. I punch my complex biometric code into the high-security keypad. The heavy deadbolt retracts with a solid, satisfying click. I push open the front door and step into the bright sunlit foyer of my home. The house is incredibly warm smelling, faintly of vanilla and clean linen. It is completely quiet, entirely devoid of the toxic screaming chaos that defined my childhood. I place my leather briefcase on the entryway console, sliding my shoes off my aching feet. Mommy. The joyful, high-pitched squeal echoes from the living room. Rapid footsteps patter rapidly against the hardwood floor. Zuri comes hurtling down the hallway, her pigtails bouncing wildly, a brightly colored marker clutched tightly in one hand. She throws herself at my legs, wrapping her arms tightly around my knees with absolute unrestrained joy. I drop down to the floor, instantly pulling her into my lap and burying my face in her soft, curly hair. I hold her close, breathing in the sweet, innocent scent of her. She giggles, wrapping her small arms around my neck, completely safe, entirely oblivious to the monumental war I just fought and won to secure her future. I did a drawing for you, Mommy, Zuri announces proudly, pulling back to show me a piece of construction paper covered in bright, chaotic crayon scribbles. It is us, in our safe house. It is beautiful, baby, I tell her, my voice thick with happy, overwhelming emotion. It is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen in my life. I pick her up, settling her firmly on my hip, and stand tall in the center of my foyer. I look around my pristine house. The ultra-high-definition cameras blink quietly in the background, a silent testament to the technological fortress I have constructed. The bank accounts are locked down. The holding company is legally secured. The federal prosecutors are currently handling the trash that tried to infest my life. I no longer have to look over my shoulder waiting for the next betrayal. I no longer have to shrink myself to fit into a mold created by bitter, broken people who wanted to see me fail. The massive financial empire I built in the dark, through years of quiet, relentless grinding, is finally entirely my own. The toxic family is gone forever, and the future we are walking into now shines brilliantly in the warm, undeniable sun. The most powerful takeaway from this narrative is the supreme importance of self-reliance and strategic foresight when dealing with toxic family dynamics. Blood relations do not guarantee loyalty, respect, or safety. Aaliyah's story teaches us that when people repeatedly show you who they are through their actions, you must believe them and prepare accordingly. Instead of reacting emotionally to betrayal, she responded with cold, calculated preparation. She did not seek validation from a mother and sister who were fundamentally committed to misunderstanding her. She quietly built her own impenetrable fortress. True empowerment comes from recognizing your own worth, securing your independence, and refusing to play by the rules of those who actively wish to see you fail. When you are entirely self-sufficient, the manipulative tactics of abusers lose all their power. You learn that walking away is not a form of defeat, but the ultimate victory of claiming your own peace. If you are ready to stop letting toxic people dictate your worth, and start building your own untouchable empire. Hit that subscribe button and join our community of